The Academy champion poured 6,000 mana into a single strike. The weakest student spent 12, and the spear spun 180 degrees and jabbed the champion right in the forehead. The hall fell silent. No one realized that the boy who had been pitted against others in duels for 7 years, merely for laughs, had just shattered the very essence of magic. Now let's rewind. The first thing he feels is pain. Dull, aching. It sits in every bone like rust in old iron. Above him is a stone ceiling with a lightning-shaped crack, where water is dripping from somewhere. He tries to raise his hand and can't. His fingers are trembling, thin, alien. His hands used to be wider and sturdier, with calluses from the keyboard and marks from the neural shunt on his wrist, but these are like a child's. He realizes this immediately. A woman in her 40s with tired eyes is leaning over him. She whispers that the poor child has lost consciousness again. Again. That word sticks with him. So this isn't the first time the body has shut down. He remembers his death. Red error code, implant failure, darkness, and now a stone ceiling and a foreign body. He takes his first breath with his new lungs. They're small, there isn't enough air, but his mind is working. His mind always works, and memories come in waves. A stranger's memories pour in like cold water into cracks. Kyle Windmer, 15 years old, a student at Silver Hall Academy. Mana reserve, 312 units. Others have thousands, some have tens of thousands. 312 is like entering a bike race when everyone else is in sports cars. And immediately, 7 years of mockery flooded back. The boy they'd put up for duels just for laughs. The boy whose spells crumbled in the middle of a spell. The boy whom the teachers didn't even scold. They pitied him. And that's worse. But now there's a different person in this body. Han Jisoo, 27 years old in his past life. The best hacker of secure systems. He broke into military neural networks, banking AIs, Class A corporate shields. That's why they killed him. The healer leaves. He sits down on the bed. His head is spinning. His hands tremble from the slightest effort, and then he looks at his right wrist. A mark glows there. A of a student. Kyle's memory tells him it's just a badge of belonging, nothing special. But Jisoo sees it differently. For 20 years, he's been reading code, in any language. And the first thing he learned was to distinguish working code from junk. This rune has 3 extra curls. They don't connect to anything. They serve no function. They're just there, like dead lines that someone copied and forgot to delete. And that means only one thing. Whoever created the rune didn't understand what they were doing. They copied. They didn't create. And for the first time in Kyle's 7 years of life, Jisoo smiles. Not a happy smile. It's the smile of a man who's opened the hood of a car and seen that half the parts are held together with duct tape. Everything can be taken apart. Everything can be rewritten. He stands up. His legs buckle. He grabs the wall. Takes a step. Then another. Finds a stub of a charcoal pencil and a piece of parchment. He sits down on the cold floor by the window and draws the rune from his wrist. Curl by curl. In, body, out. What it takes in. What it does. What it gives back. He circles the 3 extra curls. Next to them, he writes a single word in Latin script. Deprecated. Obsolete. Trash. He works until dark. Then he presses his face against the window and looks at the nearest magical lamp. He can see it even from here. At least 4 of the 12 elements do nothing. A third of the structure is dead weight. The lamp consumes 3 times more mana than necessary, and there are hundreds of such lamps in the academy. Thousands. He lies down, stares at the ceiling, and realizes the main thing. Magic is a system. A system has architecture, rules, vulnerabilities, and no one has maintained this system for hundreds of years. No one checked the code. No one looked for bugs. Everyone just copied it from book to book, from century to century, piling up junk and losing meaning. The weakest in the academy. No strength, no connections, no name. But he sees what no one else sees. He sees that the code is rotten. And whoever sees the rotten code can rewrite it. In the morning, his body aches even more after a night on the cold floor, but his head is clear. He hides the parchments under the mattress. He pulls on a gray hoodie with a lowest rank patch. Kyle's memory prompts the schedule. First class, combat magic. That very class where Kyle used to pass out every other week. Jisoo walks down the hallway and reads the runes on the walls one by one, like a programmer in a server room. Half of them are redundant. The whole system is sick. Not just in one place, everywhere. He enters a circular hall with a stone arena in the center. He feels eyes on him. Kyle's memory responds with the familiar pang of shame. But Jisoo is not Kyle. He sits down. He doesn't lower his head. He takes out his notebook. Master Reynolds announces practice duels and names a pair, Kyle Windmer and Marcus Holden. A ripple of laughter runs through the hall. Marcus is the heir to a ducal house, 6,200 mana points, junior class champion. Broad shoulders, the smirk of a man who knows he's won before the fight even begins. Pitting him against Kyle isn't training, it's entertainment. They step into the arena. Marcus looks down on him. He says he'll finish quickly so as not to drag it out. The hall laughs. The master raises his hand. Marcus begins to cast, and Jisoo sees every movement. Marcus's fingers trace 4 runes. Aaron's Spear, a standard attack, a classic. Mana flows through the runes. Jisoo sees the flow, not with her eyes, with a new sense that came with this body. A bluish stream enters the first rune, passes through the second, takes shape in the third, shoots out of the fourth. And there it is, the second rune, Trajectory Stabilizer. It tells the spear where to fly, and there is no verification. No validation. It accepts the vector and doesn't ask who gave it. A classic vulnerability. Marcus finishes the cast. A spear of pure mana weaves through the air, long, shining, 6,000 mana in a single strike. The hall falls silent. And Jisoo stands with his arms down. He's not preparing a defense. The spear surges forward. And at that moment, he utters a single word in the ancient language. He draws 4 strokes, 12 units of mana. All it takes. 12 out of 312. The stabilizer accepts a new vector. It doesn't check the source, it just accepts it. The spear pivots 180 degrees, smoothly, almost lazily, and pokes Marcus in the forehead with its blunt end. Like a finger. Silence. Marcus stands with his mouth open. A point glows on his forehead from his own spell. Master Reynolds drops his cup. It shatters against the stone like a gunshot. Jisoo shrugs. He says that this spell's direction vector isn't validated, that he simply passed a different argument. No one understands a word. The hall erupts in whispers. And the Magister slowly picks up the shards and looks at the boy. And for the first time, fear appears in his empty eyes. Jisoo returns to his seat, opens his notebook, writes it down. Aaron's Spear, 4 runes, stabilizer in the second position, no validation. Interception cost, 12 units. The first entry in the New World database. And an hour later, he is summoned to the rector's office. The rector's office was at the top of the central tower, 247 steps. Kyle's body barely managed them. Jisoo climbed and counted the runes on the walls of the stairwell. 63 of them. Protective. Monitoring. 3 of them were broken. He could tell by the jagged streams of mana that didn't close the circuit. Broken long ago. Maybe years. No one had noticed. No one had checked. Rector Aldwin Greyheart sat at a dark wooden desk, an old man with a white beard and a heavy gaze. Jisoo couldn't determine the mana reserve, but judging by the density of the air around the old man, he knew it was a 5-digit figure. Master Reynolds stood nearby. His face was stony, hands behind his back. Behind the rector hung a portrait in a gold frame, a man in a robe with 7 stars, one of the first mages. The rune on the portrait's frame also contained a dead code. Jisoo looked away. Not the time. The rector spoke. His voice was even, calm. He asked what had happened in the arena. Jisoo answered, simply, without technical terms. He said he had noticed a vulnerability in the spell's structure and exploited it. The rector exchanged a glance with Reynolds. He asked who had taught him that. Jisoo said no one. He said he had simply looked at the rune and seen how it was constructed. The rector leaned back in his chair. He was silent for a long time. Then he said that in the Academy's 500 years of existence, not a single student had ever turned another's spell back on the caster. He said that it required an understanding of structure that was beyond even most masters. He said that a boy with 312 mana points couldn't do that. It was impossible. Jisoo remained silent. The rector asked another question. He asked why Kyle Windmer had spent 3 nights drawing runes on the infirmary floor. The healer reported. Jisoo realized that there was no more privacy in this world than there was on a corporate network. He pulled a parchment from his bosom, the very one, with a breakdown of the apprentice's rune mark. He placed it on the table. The rector looked at it. Reynolds peered over his shoulder. On the parchment was a rune mark, but not as it was drawn in the textbooks. Jisoo had broken it down into its elements, each curl separately, with annotations, entry, function, exit. 3 elements were circled in red. Next to them was a signature in a language the rector didn't know. The rector asked what it meant. Jisoo said that the 3 elements of the rune served no function. They weren't connected to the rest of the structure. They didn't affect the result. They simply take up space and waste mana. He said that if they were removed, the rune would work exactly the same way, but consume 30% less energy. The rector was silent. Reynolds was silent. The air in the office grew heavy. The rector stood up. He walked over to the window. He stared down at the academy courtyard for a long time. Then he said that Kyle Windmer should not discuss this with the other students. He said that the world was not ready for such questions. He said that there were people who would consider these writings heresy. He wasn't threatening him. He was warning him. Jisoo nodded. He took the parchment. He left. He stopped on the stairs. He leaned against the wall. Kyle's heart was pounding, not from fear, from the strain. 247 steps up, now the same number down. His body was in terrible shape. The boy had barely eaten properly for 7 years. He hadn't trained. He lived on nerves and shame. This had to be fixed. He went down to the dining hall, a large room with long wooden tables. Students sat in groups, conversations, laughter, the clatter of dishes. Jisoo took a plate of porridge and a piece of bread. He sat in a corner. He began to eat, slowly. His body craved food. Every spoonful was like a gift. He sat and watched. He scanned the room the way he scanned server rooms. Who was sitting with whom? Who was looking at whom? Who was avoiding whom? The hierarchy was obvious. The central tables were for aristocrats with high status. The outer ones were for those of simpler means. The corner was for outcasts. He sat in the outcasts' corner. There were 3 other people nearby. A boy with his head perpetually bowed, a girl in glasses with ink stains on her fingers, and another girl, small, quiet, with warm brown eyes. She was looking at him, not surreptitiously, directly. Then she stood up. She walked over. She placed a second bowl of porridge in front of him. She said he hadn't eaten anything in 3 days. She said she'd seen him lying in the infirmary. She'd come every day and ask the healer how he was doing. Her name was Sonhee Lee, the daughter of a village herbalist, a scholarship student for gifted commoners, a junior-year healer. Jisoo looked at her, small, thin. Her hands were calloused, not aristocratic. She hadn't come out of curiosity, not for profit. She came because she saw that someone was hungry. He said thank you. She sat down across from him, silently. She didn't ask questions about what had happened in the arena. Everyone else in the hall was whispering about it. She just sat there and made sure he finished his meal. The girl in glasses moved closer. Leah Brightwell. Kyle's memory prompted the name. A middle-class aristocrat, an eccentric. She read banned books on theoretical magic. She wore glasses even though she could heal her eyesight with a single spell. She said the glasses helped her think. Leah didn't stay silent. Leah asked directly how he'd done it. Jisoo looked at her ink-stained fingers, at the glasses sliding slightly down her nose, at the eyes that didn't burn with admiration, curiosity, greedy, hungry. She didn't want his praise. She wanted to understand. He said he would explain, but not here. Too many ears. Leah nodded. Her eyes lit up even brighter. The 3rd day at the academy, Jisoo spent it in the library. Kayla's memory knew where it was, but the boy almost never went there. Why would he? The books were for those who could cast spells. The library turned out to be enormous. 3 floors, thousands of volumes, dusty shelves stretching into the darkness, rune lamps on the walls, dim, barely alive. Half of them weren't working. Jisoo started with a basic textbook on runology. The language was archaic, heavy, but the essence was simple. Runes are instructions. Mana is energy. A mage activates a rune by channeling mana through it. The more mana, the more powerful the effect. Simple and crude, like hammering nails with a sledgehammer. It works, but no one asks if they can use a smaller hammer and hit more accurately. He read for 4 hours, then 5. Then he lost count. He took notes, he compared, he drew diagrams. The runes in the textbooks were the same as those on the walls, the same lifeless elements, the same superfluous flourishes. The system had been copying itself for centuries. Every new scribe added something of their own and didn't remove the old. Like code that passes through 100 programmers, each adding their own crutch on top of someone else's. 500 years later, 10% of the original remains. The rest is garbage. Late at night, he found something interesting. A light spell. Basic, standard. It burned in every corridor of every academy across the entire continent. 2 runic elements. He figured it out in an hour. 4 elements did the work. Generation, stabilization, retention, propagation. The other 8 did nothing. 8 out of 12. 2/3 of the spell was junk. Jisoo sat and looked at his notes. Then he began rewriting. He removed the 8 unnecessary elements. He restructured the remaining 4. He optimized the flow. The new version of the light spell consisted of 5 elements instead of 12. The additional 5th was his own addition. Adjusting the brightness to the size of the room, a small thing, but a small thing that saved another 10% of mana. In total, the new light spell consumed 6 times less mana than the standard one. And it shone brighter, because the energy wasn't leaking into dead elements, but was put to work. He wrote down the final version, neatly, cleanly. He set down his pen. He looked out the window. Night. Silence. Somewhere far below, a patrol with lanterns was circling the academy walls. Wasting mana, just like everyone here. Just like always. He thought about how much mana was wasted every day just to light this one academy. How much across the whole country. How much over 100 years. Over 500. The numbers were astronomical. Entire rivers of energy poured into the garbage code and evaporated. And then these same people said that commoners were too weak for magic. That 300 units wasn't enough. Of course it wasn't enough. If you spend 200 of them heating an empty space. He put away his notes, returned to the room, lay down, fell asleep instantly. His body was exhausted, but his mind was clear. The first working hypothesis was confirmed. The magic of this world is neither weak nor strong. It is simply inefficient. And that meant that someone with little mana but a deep understanding could accomplish more than someone with an ocean of mana but a rigid mindset. A week passed. Jisoo did nothing to draw attention. He attended classes. He sat quietly. He took notes. For him, every lesson was not about learning, but about gathering data. He watched how the teachers cast spells, how runes formed, how mana flowed. And he wrote everything down, every structure, every element, every extra curl. By the end of the week, he had 14 notebook pages analyzing 23 standard spells. Not a single one was effective. Not a single one. The most glaring example was the basic barrier, a defensive spell taught in the second year. 17 runic elements. Jisoo counted 100 dead, 6 working ones. The barrier consumed 300 mana. It could have used 70. He thought about it, and it made him uneasy. Not because of the scale of the problem, because of how long it had existed. Hundreds of years, thousands of mages, and no one had checked. Marcus Holden hadn't forgotten. Of course he hadn't forgotten. The heir to a ducal house, whom his own spell had poked in the forehead in front of the entire class. On the third day after the duel, he upped to Jisoo in the hallway, with 2 companions, both aristocrats, both larger than him. Marcus said he didn't know what trick Kyle had used. He said tricks don't work twice. He said that in the next duel, he wouldn't hold back. Jisoo looked at him. Marcus was handsome, tall, broad-shouldered. The academy uniform fit him like a glove. 6,200 mana points. A lineage stretching back centuries. Everything needed for success in this world. But in Marcus's eyes, Jisoo saw not anger, fear. The boy was scared. His worldview had cracked. If the weakest student in the academy could counter his best spell, then power meant nothing. And if power meant nothing, then who was he? Jisoo didn't answer. He just walked past. Marcus clenched his fists. But he didn't strike. Not here. Not in front of witnesses. Later. That evening, Leah found him in the library. She sat down next to him. She took out her notebook, a thick one, worn, with dog-eared pages and bookmarks made of dried leaves. She said she wanted to show him something. Jisoo opened it and froze. Leah's notes were chaotic. They jumped from topic to topic. They were interspersed with drawings and notes in the margins. But a system emerged from the chaos. Leah was trying to classify the runes, not by effect, as in textbooks, by structure. She noticed that the same elements repeated in different spells. She grouped them. She looked for patterns. She did this on her own, without a teacher, without books, because no books on the subject existed. And she made mistakes, many, often. But on page 14, she wrote something that took Jisu's breath away. She hypothesized that barrier mana and offensive mana were not two different types of energy, as they had been taught at the academy. It was the same mana passed through runes with different parameters. She was almost right. She was wrong in one place. She mixed up cause and effect. But the direction was correct. Jisu looked at her. Leah looked back. Her face showed both anxiety and hope. She was waiting for him to speak, to say it was nonsense, that a girl shouldn't meddle in theory, that she'd be better off focusing on practice. That's what she'd been told her whole life. Her mother, her teachers, her classmates. Thinking isn't a woman's job. Theory isn't for you. Know your place. Jisu said that on page 14, she had an almost correct hypothesis about the nature of barrier mana. He said she was wrong in one place. He asked if she would show him exactly where. Leah opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her eyes behind her glasses grew wet. She blinked quickly, turned away, swallowed, turned back, nodded. They talked until morning. Jisu showed her his method, breaking down a rune into its elements, identifying the entry and exit points, searching for dead code. Leah grasped it instantly, faster than he expected. She didn't just understand, she saw connections he had missed. By dawn, they had deciphered 3 more spells together. And Leah said, with a completely serious expression, that Professor Reynolds had a memory leak in his signature fire barrier. Jisu laughed for the first time in this body. Kyle Windmer's laughter turned out to be quiet and hoarse, as if his throat had forgotten how. The following week, Sony came to him on her own, not with a notebook, with a problem. She sat down on a bench in the courtyard. She was silent for a long time. Then she spoke. Her voice was steady, too steady. She told him that her healing spells sometimes killed patients. Not often. Once every few months, but every time. Every time it happened, she wouldn't sleep for weeks. She checked her technique, her concentration, her intentions. She prayed, she fasted. She tried to purify her soul. Because everyone told her that healing magic comes from a pure heart. If a healer kills, it means her heart isn't pure. It meant she wasn't good enough, not pure enough, not worthy enough. She lived with that for 7 years. For 7 years, she believed she was killing people with her wickedness. Jisu listened. He was silent. When she finished, he asked her to show him the rune for the healing spell. Sony showed it to him. He studied it for 20 minutes. Then he looked up. He looked at Sony. He spoke evenly, calmly, without drama. He said that there was an error in the standard healing rune, a rounding error. The spell is calculated based on the patient's average mana reserve. At certain values below the threshold, it mends the wrong tissue. It's not her soul. It's not her heart. It's a bug in the code that was written 300 years ago and that no one has checked since. Sony was silent. She looked at him, then at the rune, then at him. Then she covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook. She cried silently. 7 years of guilt. 7 years of self-loathing. 7 years of being convinced she was a murderer. And all this time, it wasn't her fault. It was because of one extra curl that someone, at some point, had drawn wrong. Jisu didn't touch her. He didn't say anything. He sat beside her. He waited. When Sony lifted her face, her eyes were red, wet. But there was no pain in them. There was something else. She asked if he could fix it. He said he had already fixed it. While she was talking, he took out a parchment. On it was a new healing rune, without a mistake. with an additional element that automatically calibrates the intensity to the patient's reserves. Sonhee took the parchment. Her hands were shaking. She looked at the rune as if it were a sacred text, but it wasn't a sacred text. It was a patch, a correction of an error. The most ordinary thing. She cried until midnight, quietly, into her pillow. And the next morning she came to breakfast with red eyes and a calm smile. And she became the first person in this world who believed in Jisoo completely and unconditionally. Not as a genius, not as a hero. As a man who had lifted 7 years of guilt from her with a single sheet of parchment. By the end of the first month, Jisoo had found the Academy's steward, an old man named Harold, a small, gaunt man with a perpetually worried expression. Harold was in charge of Silverhall's upkeep, of the lighting, of heating, for the barriers, for everything that required mana and a budget. And the budget was never enough. For 20 years he had struggled with expenses. For 20 years he had asked the council to increase subsidies. For 20 years he had been refused. Jisoo came to him in the evening. He placed a parchment with a new light spell on the table. He explained it briefly. Same brightness, 6 times less mana. Harold looked at the parchment, looked at Jisoo, looked at the parchment again. Then he took out his ledger. He began to calculate. If he replaced all the lamps in the academy with the new version, the hallways, the halls, the library, the towers, the grounds. He calculated for a long time. His fingers trembled. When he finished, he looked up. The old man's eyes were wet. He said that for the first time in 20 years, he would stay within budget. For the first time in 20 years, he wouldn't have to grovel before the council. For the first time, there would be enough money to repair the South Wing, a project that had been put off for 10 years. He asked what Jisoo wanted in return. Jisoo said he wanted access to the maintenance archives, the old blueprints of the runes used in the Academy's construction. Gerald took out the key and handed it over without a second thought. A small victory. Quiet. Unnoticed. Not a single student found out. Not a single master paid attention. The hallways just became a little brighter. The Castellan just stopped walking around with a glazed look in his eyes. They just started patching the roof in the South Wing. Jisoo stood by the window and looked at the new lights. They were working. Stably. Cleanly. No glitches. The first commit in this world. Accepted and deployed. The second month began with rain. Cold, unceasing. The Academy's walls had darkened from the damp. Puddles stood in the courtyard. Kale's body was freezing. Jisoo wore 2 layers of his uniform and still chattered his teeth during morning roll call. His body needed nourishment. Train, recover. He ate 3 times a day. He forced himself. He ran up the stairs every morning, not for strength, for endurance. So he could climb the rector's tower without gasping for breath. After a week, it got easier. After 2, he could run the entire length of the East Wing corridor without stopping. A small thing. But in this body, any small thing was a victory. The group formed on its own. Jisoo didn't announce recruitment, didn't post flyers. Leah just brought 1 person. Sonhee brought another. 4 people besides him. Leah, Sonhee, a boy named Ren Tallis, and a girl named Mira Court. Ren Tallis, 14 years old, 180 mana units. The lowest reserve in the entire class, even lower than Kyle's. A boy with big ears and a habit of staring at the floor. He hardly spoke to anyone. He sat in the back row during classes. He didn't raise his hand. He didn't try to cast spells unless asked. He had given up long ago. Mira Court, 15 years old, 400 mana points, the daughter of a blacksmith from a border town. She got into the academy through the military quota. Strong, quiet, hands covered in calluses. She was better with metal than with mana. The teachers didn't know what to do with her. She didn't fit in. The first club meeting took place in a far corner of the library, between bookcases that hadn't been opened in years. Dust, silence, dim light. Jisoo sat down on the floor. The others sat around him. He said he wouldn't teach them magic. He said he would teach them how to think. Leah nodded. She already knew what that meant. The others looked on in confusion. Jisoo took the rune for the basic light spell, the very one he had already analyzed. He drew it on the parchment, 12 elements. He asked each of them to look and say what they saw. Ren said he saw a light spell. Mira said the same thing. Leah remained silent. She waited. Sonhee said she saw a rune that worked. Jisoo nodded. Then he circled 8 of the 12 elements. He asked what those 8 did. Silence. No one knew. No one had ever asked that question. Jisoo said those 8 did nothing. He drew his version next to it, 5 elements. He lit it. 20 mana. A flame flared at the tip of the pen, bright, pure, even. Then he lit the standard version, 120 mana. The flame was weaker, dimmer. The 4 of them watched the 2 flames, one bright and cheap, the other dim and expensive. Ren raised his head. For the first time in a long while, he looked someone in the eye. He asked, why? Why did everyone use the inferior version when they could use the superior one? Jisoo said it was because no one had checked. Everyone had just copied it, from book to book, from century to century. And those who could have checked saw no point. They had enough mana not to notice the loss. Ren was silent. Then he spoke softly. He said that if a spell could be cast more cheaply, then its 180 units might be enough for something. His voice trembled. Jisoo nodded. He said it would be enough. For the next 2 weeks, he worked with them every evening, not with magic, with analysis. He taught them to break down runes into their elements, to look for dead code, to check inputs and outputs. Leah was the first to master it. She was already halfway there. She just needed a method. Sonhee progressed more slowly, but more confidently. She was used to precision. Healing magic demanded attention to detail. Mira surprised everyone. She looked at the runes as if they were blueprints, like a blacksmith looks at a piece of metal, where there was excess metal, where it could be trimmed, where form hindered function. She didn't think like a mage. She thought like a craftsman. And it worked. Ren was the slowest, but the most stubborn. He sat over each rune for hours, redrawing, recalculating, erasing, starting over. It was harder for him than anyone else because he was more afraid than anyone else. For 14 years, he'd believed he was useless, that his 180 points were a death sentence, that magic wasn't for people like him. Now they were telling him that was a lie, and he wanted to believe, but he was afraid. By the 3rd week, Ren had done it. He'd broken down the basic shield spell, found 9 of the 15 missing elements, rewrote it, assembled a new version. 6 elements. Casting cost. 30 mana instead of 150. He activated it during training. The shield flashed. Blue, transparent, thin, but real. It worked. Ren stood with his arm outstretched and the mana shield he'd created himself for the first time in his life. His 180 units were enough, with room to spare. He stood and didn't move. His mouth was slightly open, eyes wide. Then his lower lip trembled. He quickly turned away. Leah placed a hand on his shoulder. Sonhee smiled. Mira nodded briefly, like a blacksmith approving an apprentice's work. Jisoo jotted it down in his notebook. Ren Talus. First cast. Shield. Optimized version. Cost 30. Stable. Functional. Then he closed the notebook and thought that this alone was worth waking up every morning in a stranger's body. In the middle of the second month, a letter arrived. Not for him, for Kyle Windmer, from his sister, Alice Windmer. Kyle's memory responded with warmth and pain at the same time. His older sister, 20 years old, a Silver Hall graduate 3 years ago. She worked in the Capitol, junior archivist with the Council of Seven. She wrote once a month, warm letters full of concern. How are you? How are your classes? Are you eating properly? Is anyone picking on you? Between the lines, one could read what she hadn't written. I'm sorry I can't take you away. I'm sorry I can't protect you. I'm sorry things are this way. Jisoo read the letter and felt Kyle's memory tighten in his chest. This boy loved his sister, more than anyone in the world. She was the only person who didn't pity him but simply loved him. Jisoo put down the letter. He picked up a pen. And for the first time, he wrote a reply not as Kyle. He wrote that everything was fine, that he was eating better, that he'd found friends, that he was doing something interesting, that he missed her. He wrote that last word because Kyle would have written it, and because Jisoo realized he missed her too. Not for Alice, not for the idea of a sister, but for the person waiting for your letters. In his past life, he had no one waiting for him. He sealed the letter, took it to the post office, and went to evening training. That evening at training, he was paired against Marcus again. Master Reynolds announced the match. A whisper. Everyone remembered what had happened last time. Marcus stepped into the arena. His face was hard. His eyes were cold. He had been preparing. He had been preparing for 2 weeks. Jisoo could see it. Marcus began his cast. Not Aaron's spear. Another spell. Morven's chain. 6 runes. More complex. Faster. Attacks from 3 directions at once. Jisoo watched. He read. 6 runes. The first, Initiator. The second, Multiplier. The third, Stabilizer. The fourth, Guide. The fifth, Amplifier. The sixth, Lock. Mana flowed through them like water through pipes. Beautiful. Powerful. Marcus had poured in no less than 1,000 units. 3 chains of pure energy surged toward Jisoo from 3 sides. Left, right, above. Jisoo couldn't deploy all 3. He wouldn't have enough mana. He wouldn't have enough time. But he didn't need to deploy them. He read the lock, the 6th rune. It held all 3 chains together. A single point of failure. He directed 18 units of mana into the lock rune. Not attacking, not destroying. Just adding 1 element, tiny. 4 strokes, a condition that wasn't in the original. If the target is not detected, cancel. The lock accepted the new parameter. It didn't check the source. It didn't request confirmation. The 3 chains dissolved into thin air 1/2 meter from Jisoo. Quietly, without a flash, without a sound. They simply vanished. Marcus stood with his arms outstretched, empty-handed, 1,000 mana spent. 0 results. The hall was silent. Master Reynolds didn't drop his cup. He didn't have one. He stood and looked at Jisoo with an expression Jisoo had already seen in a past life. That was how corporate security guards looked at him when he showed them an infiltration report. Marcus lowered his hands. He said one word. How? His voice was quiet, almost pitiful. Jisoo didn't bother to explain, not out of cruelty, out of practicality. Marcus wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe later. He returned to his seat, jotted it down in his notebook. Morven's chain. 6 runes. A single point of failure in the lock rune. Neutralization cost, 18 units. Leah moved closer to him. She whispered that there was a style leak in his neutralization spell. She said he was doing it too elegantly for a student with 300 mana. Jisoo snorted. It was the first time anyone in this world had joked in his language. The 4th month. Autumn had set in. The trees around the academy had turned yellow. The wind carried leaves across the courtyard. The days had grown shorter, the evenings longer. Jisoo spent them in the library or in the administrative archives that Harold had opened to him. The archives were in the basement, damp, dark. Shelves with blueprints that hadn't been touched in decades. Dust lay in layers. The air smelled of old paper and mold. The runic construction plans for Silver Hall were stored here. 500 years of history. Every stone, every corridor, every barrier had been documented. And Jisoo read it as he had read source code in his past life, layer by layer, version by version. Each generation of mages added their own edits on top of the old ones. No one removed the previous ones. Over 5 centuries, the system had grown like a coral reef. Hundreds of layers of dead code, thousands of forgotten elements, and somewhere, deep beneath all that debris, lay the original, the first version, written by the founders. He had been digging for it for 3 weeks, every evening, 2 or 3 hours at a time. Leah helped. She would come with tea and her notebook. She would sit down next to him and study the blueprints. They worked in silence, sometimes exchanging short phrases. He would say he'd found another dead element in the barrier structure of the East Wing. She'd reply that she saw a similar pattern in the West Wing. Silence. The rustle of paper. The scratch of a pen. Once, Leah looked up and asked why he spoke so strangely. She said that sometimes he used words that didn't exist in any of Etheria's languages. Jisoo froze for a second. Then he said he just had an unusual way of expressing himself. Leah gave him a long look. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press the issue. She went back to the drawings. Jisoo thought that sooner or later he would have to resolve this problem. Who he was, where he came from, and what had happened to the real Kyle. But not now. The attack happened on Thursday, late at night. Jisoo was returning from the archives to his room. The hallway was empty. The lights glowed dimly, standard ones. Harold hadn't had time to replace them all yet. A shadow darted out of a niche, quickly, silently, professional. A man in dark clothing, his face covered. An artifact on his right hand. A massive black metal bracelet. It activated instantly. The air around Jisoo thickened. Mana vanished. Not all of it, but enough. A mana suppressor. An artifact that suppressed magic within a 10-meter radius. Expensive. Rare. Someone had hired a professional. The man lunged forward, a knife in his left hand. Not magical, ordinary steel, because magic didn't work within the suppressor's range. Neither the victim nor the killer had any magic, only physical advantage. And for a grown man against a 15-year-old boy, that advantage was absolute. Jisoo couldn't cast. He couldn't interfere with someone else's spell. There was no spell. There was only a knife and a man who knew how to use it. But there was also the artifact, the bracelet, the decoder. It was working. Which meant it contained a runic structure, which meant it could be read. Jisoo jumped back, tripped, fell. Kyle's body was still weak. It had gotten faster, not stronger. The man took a step closer. He swung. Jisoo rolled out of the way. The knife struck the stone. Sparks. He got up, ran back 3 steps, looked at the bracelet, read. There was no time, none at all. In a fight with mages, he had seconds while they were casting. Here, he wasn't given seconds. The man was advancing, quickly, confidently. He knew his prey was weak. He knew there was nowhere to run. The corridor was a dead end. Jisoo pressed his back against the wall. His eyes didn't leave the bracelet. The runes on it were small, dense, complex. Artifact work, not academic, military, or mercenary. But the principle was the same. Entry, body, exit. The entry point is the wearer's own mana. The artifact drew power from its owner. The body is the suppression of surrounding mana, the generation of an anti-magic field. The exit is a 10-meter zone. Within the zone, any magic lost stability and disintegrated. Clever, effective, but the artifact suppressed the mana around it. It didn't distinguish whose, and it drew power from the wearer, so it also suppressed the wearer's mana. But the wearer is still alive and functional, so there's an exception in the artifact. A whitelist. A parameter that says not to suppress the source's mana. And that parameter is encoded in the rune. Jisoo found it. The third inner line, thin, almost invisible. It identified the wearer's mage signature and excluded it from suppression. Elegant. But the exception had no protection against overwriting. The man was 2 steps away. A knife flashed. Jisoo poured the remainder of his available mana into a single action. Not a spell, a command. 5 mana points, 4 strokes in the air. He did not overwrite the whitelist. He erased it. The artifact lost its exception and began to suppress its owner's mana. The mercenary stopped, as if he'd run into a wall. His body went limp, his legs buckled. The bracelet was sucking out his own mana. It wasn't killing him, but it was paralyzing him, like a spider tangled in its own web. The man collapsed to his knees. The knife fell from his hand. It clattered against the stone. Jisoo stood by the wall. He was breathing heavily. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. Kyle's body was at its limit. 5 mana points is almost nothing, but he had definitely spent them. He waited a minute. Then he walked over. He bent down. He looked at the mercenary. The man was conscious but couldn't move. The bracelet was working against him. It would keep working until the mana ran out. Or until someone removed the artifact. Jisoo didn't remove it. He went to get help. He found the night watchman. The watchman raised the alarm. The magisters rushed over. Security. They tied up the mercenary, removed the bracelet, interrogated him. He didn't say who had hired him. Professionals don't talk. But Jisoo already knew. A jamming artifact isn't academic equipment. It's military or inquisitorial. Whoever someone outside the academy already knew enough about him to want him dead. The rector summoned him in the morning. The old man's face was ashen. He said the mercenary was carrying an Inquisition warrant. Not an official one, a draft, without a seal, but with a name. Kyle Windmer, a heretic theorist, subject to detention and interrogation. The rector said that for now it was unofficial, until the Council of 7 approved the warrant. But the word was out. The Inquisition knew his name, and if Grand Inquisitor Sylvester Holdfast decided to see the matter through, the rector wouldn't be able to protect him forever. Jisoo nodded. He asked how much time he had. The rector said he didn't know. A month, maybe 2, maybe a week. It depends on how quickly Holdfast gathers the evidence. Jisoo left the office. He walked down the 247 steps. He stood in the courtyard. Morning. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Students were heading to class. A normal day. For everyone except him. He thought about the mercenary, about the knife, about the bracelet, about how 8 seconds was all that stood between him and death. 8 seconds and 5 mana points. In his past life, he had been killed in his sleep. Quietly, cleanly, He hadn't had time to do anything. Here, he had made it. Because here, he hadn't been sleeping. Sony found him in the courtyard. She saw his face. She didn't ask anything. She took his hand. She led him to the dining room. She set porridge and tea in front of him. She sat across from him. She was silent. She waited. He ate the porridge. He drank the tea. Then he told her. Not everything, just that he'd been attacked, and that it might happen again. Sony listened. Her face went pale, but her voice was firm when she spoke. She said they would figure something out. She said they, not you. Jisoo looked at her, a little girl from the village, the herbalist's daughter. 300 mana points, no connections, no power. And she said, we. He nodded. An hour later, he gathered the circle. Leah, Sony, Ren, Mira. He told them, briefly. The Inquisition knows about him. They send a mercenary. There will be more attempts. He said he'd understand if anyone wanted to back out. It's dangerous. Their connection to him could harm them. Ren raised his head, looked straight ahead. For the first time ever, he didn't look away. He said he wasn't going anywhere. He said that before meeting Jisoo, he was nobody, a shadow. He said that now, he had a shield, a real shield, and he wasn't going to hide. Mira shrugged. She said briefly that she was the blacksmith's daughter from the border. The Inquisition was nothing new to her. Leah adjusted her glasses. She said that if the Inquisition considered knowledge heresy, then they were all heretics here. She said she liked that. Sony said nothing. She just pushed a cup of tea toward him. Jisoo watched them. 4 people, teenagers, weak by this world's standards. No connections, no protection. And they stayed. Not out of strategy, not for gain. They stayed because he gave each of them something they'd never had. The right to be themselves. He thought that in his past life, he hadn't had that. People who stay. He died alone in a corporate apartment, and the only one who noticed was the system's automated report of a neuro-interface malfunction. Here, everything is different. Here, they're looking for him to kill him. But here, there are those who sit beside him and say, we. He opened his notebook. He said that they needed to work faster. The Inquisition was giving them time, a little, but they're using every day. He assigned the tasks. Leah continues to analyze the Academy's runic architecture. She's looking for vulnerabilities in the defense systems, not to break them, to know where they are and how to strengthen them. Sonhee is working on healing runes. She checks every one she finds for errors. She documents every one she fixes. Ren with optimized spells, gaining practice. Mira studies artifacts. Her blacksmith's hands and her view of runes as blueprints make her the ideal candidate. They began that very evening. Jisoo watched them, their bowed heads, at the quills racing across the parchment, at the candlelight reflecting in Leah's glasses, at Sony's warm hands turning the pages, at Ren's stubborn brow, at Mira's strong fingers clutching a shard of an artifact. He thought this was the strangest team he had ever put together. In his past life, he had colleagues, experts, professionals, tools for solving problems. Here, there were children, broken, misunderstood, cast aside by a system that valued only strength, and they were stronger than any team he could remember, because they had nothing to lose, because they had already lost everything and had found it all over again. Here, in a dusty corner of the library, over notebooks and parchments, next to a boy with 312 mana points and 20 years of experience hacking systems. He smiled, quietly, to himself. He opened his notebook to a blank page. He wrote the title, Project Silver Hall Defense, Version 1. And he began to work. The 6th month. Winter had settled over Silver Hall like a white shroud. The Academy's towers stood covered in frost. The wind howled through the narrow windows. Kyle's body had learned not to feel the cold. Not because it had grown stronger, because Jisoo had finally found a second scarf. The summons to the Council of Seven arrived at dawn. A bird with a golden seal on its claw. An official invitation. Not a warrant, not an arrest. An invitation. Rector Greyheart personally handed over the scroll. The old man's hands were steady, but his voice was not. He said the council wanted to see the boy who deflects others' spells. He said it might be a trap. He said he couldn't refuse. Jisoo read the scroll. 7 seals, 1 from each archmage. The meeting is in 3 days, the capital of Waldron, the council tower. He asked the rector which of the archmages was behind it. The rector paused. Then he said that perhaps one. Evander Thorne, a 60-year-old man, one of the 7, the quietest, the most inconspicuous. For 20 years, he's been publishing papers claiming that something is wrong with the great formula. He's considered an eccentric, not dangerous, just an old eccentric with an obsession. The other 6, 2 are corrupt. 1 is a fanatic. 1 is a coward. 2 are unknown. The rector said those weren't odds worth betting on. Jisoo said there were no others. He was riding to the capital, for the first time in both of his lives. Kyle's body felt awful in the saddle. By the end of the first day of the journey, he couldn't feel his legs. By the second, he'd learned not to fall off. By the third, he'd almost stopped cursing the horse. 2 others were riding with him, Master Reynold as the official escort, and Yuna Pak. She wasn't on the escort list. She was simply standing at the gate with a katana behind her back when he rode out. She said briefly that she was going with him. Reynold began to object. Yuna looked at him. Reynold fell silent. Yuna Pak, 17 years old, heiress to a fallen samurai clan from the Eastern Islands, at the academy on a strict contract. Top 10, or her family loses their last remaining lands. A swordswoman mage, cold, direct. She spoke as she struck, with short, sharp strikes. Jisoo knew her story from Kyle's memories, but they had hardly ever crossed paths in person. She was a senior, he was a freshman. Different worlds. Until last week. A week ago, Leah told him about Yuna's katana, a family heirloom, an enhancement rune on the blade, ancient, family-owned. Yuna cast it every day during training, and every time, the rune drained her mana 3 times faster than it should have. Yuna thought it was a family curse, punishment for the sins of her ancestors. She trained until she passed out, got back up, trained again. For 3 years, every day. No complaints, no tears. With a stony face and blood on her lips from biting her cheek. Jisoo asked to see the katana. Yuna refused, coldly, briefly. Family weapons aren't given to strangers. He nodded, didn't press the issue. He asked permission to look at the rune during training. Yuna paused. Then she allowed it. He sat on a bench by the training hall and watched for an hour. Yuna worked with the katana. Her movements were precise, beautiful, deadly. The rune on the blade flashed with every strike. Blue, bright. And it faded too quickly. Mana was draining away. Yuna was turning pale. By the end of the hour, she could barely stand. Jisoo saw the rune. He saw the structure. He saw the flow. And he saw the mistake. 2 runes swapped. The second and fourth elements mixed up. The result is the same. The amplification works. But the flow takes the long way instead of the short one. Like a river routed through a swamp instead of a canal. The water will reach its destination, but half will remain in the swamp. 300 years. A scribe's mistake. Someone, long ago, copied the rune from the original and mixed up two elements. And ever since, every heir of the Pak clan has paid for it with their mana. 3 centuries of a curse that never was. He approached Yuna after training. She was sitting on the floor, pale, drenched in sweat. The katana lay on her lap. He said in an even voice that there was a scribe's error in the rune on her katana. He said that 300 years ago, her great-great-grandfather had mixed up 2 runes. He said that the spell worked, but as if through a leaky bucket. Yuna raised her head. She looked at him for a long time, expressionless. Then she held out the katana, silently, hilt first. Jisoo took it. Kyle's hands were too weak for this weapon. The blade was heavy. But he didn't need strength. He needed access. He worked for 20 minutes, sitting on the floor of the training hall, with the katana on his knees and a pen in his hand. He didn't erase the rune. He didn't rewrite it. He swapped 2 elements, put them back in the right position. 4 strokes, 2 there, 2 here. He returned the katana. Yuna took it. She stood up. She activated the rune. The blade flashed, blue, bright, and it didn't go out. Mana flowed smoothly, cleanly, without loss. Yuna stood with the burning katana and didn't fall. She didn't turn pale. She didn't stagger. For the first time in 3 years, for the first time in her life. She deactivated the rune. She placed the katana on the floor. She dropped to her knees. She touched her forehead to the floor, silently. A full bow, the deepest in the tradition of the Eastern Islands. Jisoo stood there, not knowing what to do. In his past life, only 2 ironic colleagues after a successful hack. He said it wasn't necessary. Yuna raised her head. Something glinted in her eyes. She said one word. Duty. And from that day on, she never strayed more than 10 steps from him. Now she rode beside him, silent, staring at the road, her hand on the katana's hilt. Always. The capital of Waldron turned out to be enormous. Stone walls 30 meters high, towers reaching into the clouds, streets jammed with people, carts, and magical contraptions. Runes everywhere. On the houses, on the streetlights, on the pavement. Jisoo rode and read. He read the city like a code. Dead elements at every turn. Lamps with the same bloated spell. Barriers with the same superfluous flourishes. The entire capital ran on junk code. It consumed times more mana than necessary. And yet, the imperial officials complained about a mana shortage, about a lack of resources, about the commoners being too weak and not contributing enough. The council tower stood in the center of the city. White stone, 7 spires. Guards in silver armor at the entrance. Inside, marble and silence. The council hall was circular. 7 chairs on a raised platform, in a semicircle. In the center, a place for the speaker. Low, lower than the chairs, so that those standing below would look up, so that they would remember who was in charge here. The 7 archmages were already seated. Jisoo entered. He stood in the center. He looked up. 7 faces. Old. Authoritative. Indifferent. Except for one. The 5th chair on the left. Evander Thorne. 60 years old, thin, with kind eyes and wrinkles from smiling, not from anger. He looked at Jisoo with interest. The others looked at him as if he were a specimen in a laboratory. The head of the council, Archmage Kelvin Drake, spoke first. His voice was like stone, heavy, slow. He said the council had heard of the young Windmer's talents. He said that deflecting an enemy's spell was a phenomenon that required study. He said the council wanted to understand the nature of this gift. A gift. He called it a gift. Jisoo understood. They wanted to explain his abilities as something innate, a mutation, a blood anomaly, something that could be studied and replicated, or controlled. Jisoo said it wasn't a gift. He said it was an understanding of structure. He said that any mage could learn the same thing if they began to analyze runes instead of memorizing them. The silence in the hall grew thick. Archmage Selena Weiss leaned forward, a cold face, sharp cheekbones. She asked if the boy was claiming that magic could be learned like a craft. Jisoo said yes. Weiss asked if he believed that lineage and reserves didn't matter. Jisoo said that mana reserves mattered, but the efficiency of mana usage mattered more. He took out a parchment. That very one. The light spell. The standard version and his version. He placed it on the table in front of the council. He explained. 12 elements and 5. Same function. 6 times less mana. The archmages looked at the parchment. Thorn leaned in closer. His eyes lit up. Drake leaned back in his chair. His face was inscrutable. Weiss turned pale. Jisoo could see her doing the math in her head. She understood. She was one of the 7 who understood what this meant. If the light spell could be optimized 6-fold, then any spell could be optimized. And if any spell could be optimized, then the monopoly of those with abundant mana would crumble. A commoner with 300 units would become equal to an aristocrat with 3,000. The entire system collapses. The entire hierarchy. The entire world. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Questions, answers, hidden threats behind polite words. Thorn defended him gently but persistently. Drake remained silent. Weiss attacked with questions. The rest wavered. In the end, Drake announced the decision. Kyle Windmer remains at the academy, under the supervision of the council. He is forbidden to publicly teach his method. He is forbidden to leave Silverhall without permission. His notebooks will be handed over to the council for study. Jisoo nodded. He said he agreed. The notebooks he had brought were copies, incomplete ones, without the main conclusions, without an analysis of the great formula, without any notes on the distortion. The real notebooks were hidden under the floorboards in his room, 3 of them, in a hiding place that Mira had carved into the stone with her own blacksmith's hands. They left the tower. Yuna walked beside him. She was silent. Reynold walked ahead. His back was straight. His face was grim. He had heard everything, and he understood more than he let on. A man was waiting for them at the tower's exit. A short woman in a long robe with the council's silver brooch. Her dark hair was pulled back, thin-framed glasses. Her face was as calm as the surface of a frozen lake. Ivory Venn. 19 years old. Junior archmage. Thorn's assistant. She approached Jis, looked him in the eyes. In an even voice, without a single unnecessary word, she said she had read his notebooks, the ones he had handed over to the council. She said they were incomplete. She said she could see that because for 20 years she had been asking the same questions he was asking. Then she said that if he was a charlatan, she would personally lead him to the stake. And if he wasn't a charlatan, she was ready to work with him for the rest of her life. There was no third option. Jisoo looked at her calm face, at the glasses which the winter sky was reflected, at her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She was terrified. 20 years of loneliness. 20 years of questions that no one had answered. 20 years of certainty that something was wrong with the world was wrong, and that everyone around her was either blind or pretending. And now, standing before her, was a 15-year-old boy who saw the same thing she did. He said he wasn't a charlatan. She nodded, said she'd check, turned around, walked away. Yuna watched her go, then at Jisoo, raised an eyebrow. Jisoo shrugged. He said it looked like they had an ally on the council. Or an enemy. It would soon become clear. On the way back, Thorn caught up with them at the city gates. The old man was riding a mule, alone, without guards, without an entourage, in a simple cloak. He pulled up alongside Jisoo. They rode in silence for a while. Then Thorn spoke quietly. He said he knew the notebooks were incomplete. He said that in his place, he would have done the same. Then he said that 20 years ago, he had discovered the first glitches in the basic spells. A shield that let an arrow through. A healing spell that killed. A barrier that let a demon in. Everyone blamed it on the world's weariness and the aging of mana, on anything. Thorn didn't blame it on that. Thorn looked for the cause, and didn't find it. Because he wasn't looking in the right place. He looked in the nature of mana, but the cause was in the code, in the structure, in the runes that no one had checked. Thorn looked at Jisoo. The old man's eyes were weary, 20 years of weariness. He asked if the boy saw what he saw. Jisoo said he saw more. Thorn nodded. He pulled a key from under his cloak, heavy, bronze, engraved with runes. He said it was the key to the council's locked library. 200,000 volumes, 3,000 years of records, including the original rune diagrams of the first mages. He said that formally he had no right to grant access to a student. He said that formalities had long ceased to concern him. Jisoo took the key, heavy, cold. This key held access to knowledge that could change the world, or destroy it. He tucked the key into his bosom. He thanked him. Thorn smiled, the first real smile Jisoo had seen on the Archmage's face. The old man turned his mule around and rode off. No goodbye, no parting words. He just left. Jisoo rode back to Silverhall and thought about the fact that he now had 6 people. Sony, Leah, Ren, Mira, Yuna. And somewhere far away, in the capital, Ivory Ven, who would either become his strongest ally or his most dangerous enemy. And Thorn. The old man who had waited 20 years for someone who would see what he saw. 7. Him. And 6 people who, for various reasons, had decided to stand by his side. In his past life, he had worked alone, always. One minel, one keyboard, one mind against the system. Here, everything changed. Here, he learned what no corporation had ever taught him: to trust. The council's restricted library was located in the basement of the council tower. Jisoo couldn't travel to the capital every day, but Thorn arranged an official business trip for him. A research project on rune optimization. It sounded harmless. It was anything but that. Jisoo arrived in the capital at the end of the 6th month, alone. Yuna wanted to go. He said no. He said she was needed more at the academy. The club had to keep running. Leah was in charge of theory, Sony of practice, Yuna of defense. She didn't argue. She nodded, gripped the hilt of her katana, looked at him in a way that made Jisoo understand. If he didn't return, she would come for him. The library was enormous, 5 levels down, stone vaults, cold, silence. Lamps on the walls glowed with a dim greenish light. Old. Very old. Their runic structure differed from anything Jisoo had seen. Simpler, cleaner, less clutter, closer to the original. He started with the catalog. 200,000 volumes, divided by eras. The first era, the second era, the third, up to the 7th. 3,000 years of records. The first era, the time of the first mages, the founders, those who supposedly wrote the great formula. Jisoo opened the first volume. The parchment was brittle. The letters faded. but legible. And the first thing he saw struck him harder than the spin of a spear in his first duel. The runes of the first mages were perfect. No dead code, not a single superfluous element. Every flourish in its place, every line functional. Pure, elegant architecture. No clutter, no crutches, no redundancy. And structure. He recognized the structure. Not runic, logical. Conditions, loops, variables, functions with parameters, nested calls, exception handling. This was not magic as this world knew it. This was code. Real program code written in runes instead of characters. Someone 3,000 years ago wrote magic the way Jisoo wrote programs, with the same logic, with the same principles, with the same mindset. His hands trembled. He set the volume down on the table, sat down, closed his eyes. He opened them. He looked again. He hadn't imagined it. The first mages didn't invent magic. They programmed it. And then, for thousands of years, generations of mages copied their code without realizing it was code. They added their own elements without knowing why. They removed parts, thinking they were decorative. They broke the structure. They cluttered the system. They turned an elegant program into a clumsy monster. And they called it tradition. He worked in the library for 5 days. He slept on the floor between the shelves. He ate what Ivory brought him. She came twice a day. She set down a tray of food, sat across from him, said nothing, watched him read. On the third day, she couldn't take it anymore. She asked what he had found. Jisoo showed her the volume on the first era, showed her the rune, showed her the structure, explained the conditions, cycles, parameters. Ivory listened. Her face was impassive, only her fingers clenched the hem of her robe. When he finished, she was silent for a minute. Then she said that for 20 years she had suspected that magic was a system, but she couldn't prove it. She lacked the language. She lacked the terms. She saw the patterns but couldn't name them. Jisoo gave her names, functions, variables, parameters, cycles. Words that didn't exist in the language of Etheria. Words from a world that shouldn't exist either. Ivory didn't ask how he knew these words. She was too smart for unnecessary questions. She simply wrote them down. On the fourth day, he found what he was looking for. On the very bottom level of the library, in a sealed cabinet that Thorn's key barely fit into. A fragment of the great formula. Not a copy, not a retelling, an original fragment. A piece of code that formed the foundation of all of Etheria's magic. It was written on parchment that did not age. The ink had not faded in 3,000 years. The runes glowed with a quiet inner light, alive, active, working right now. This fragment was part of the system that, at this very moment, was controlling the flow of mana across the entire continent. Jisoo read it for 2 hours, slowly, line by line, element by element. The great formula was an operating system, literally. It controlled the distribution of mana, its generation, its storage, access. Just as an operating system manages memory, the processor, and I/O, and in this fragment, in one specific place, there was an edit. Not the original, a later one, different handwriting, different style. Someone had inserted an additional element into the structure. Small, imperceptible. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd miss it. But Jisoo knew what to look for. He had been looking for exactly this for 20 years. Foreign insertions in someone else's code. The edit changed a single parameter in the mana distribution system. It added a random deviation, a small one, 1%, once in 1,000 operations. The result? Sometimes spells failed. Sometimes a barrier let an arrow through. Sometimes a healing spell killed the patient. Sometimes a protective rune let a demon in. Randomly, unpredictably, once in 1,000. A distortion. For 20 years, the world had suffered from magical glitches. Archmages blamed it on fatigue, on aging, on anything. But the cause was right here. One edit, one extra element, inserted by someone intentionally. Someone who had access to the root level of the great formula. Someone who knew what they were doing. Jisoo looked at the edit, at the handwriting, at the style, and he recognized it. Not the runes, the logic, the way variables were named, the way conditions were nested, indentations, comments, habits that a programmer develops over years of work and that become second nature. This code was written by someone who thought like a programmer from Earth, not like a mage of Etheria, like a programmer. His hands trembled so much that he dropped the quill. Someone from his world had been here before. Someone had made it to Etheria before him. Someone had gained access to the great formula. And that someone had deliberately written an error into the code of reality. Intentionally. Not by accident. It wasn't the world's weariness. It was sabotage. Ivory found him sitting on the floor, the quill on the stone slabs, the parchment in his hands, his face pale. She asked what had happened. He showed her the correction. He explained what he'd found. The distortion was man-made. Someone had written it into the great formula. On purpose. Ivory looked at the parchment, then at him, then back at the parchment. Then she said very quietly, very calmly, that if this was true, then everything she knew about the world was a lie. Jisoo said it was true. Ivory sat down next to him on the floor, right on the cold stone, in her immaculate robe, with the council's silver brooch. She sat there in silence for 10 minutes. Then she asked what they were going to do. Jisoo said nothing for now. He said he needed more data. He needed to find other edits, to understand the scale, to understand who, to understand why. She nodded, stood up, brushed off her robe, adjusted her glasses, and said in a steady voice that she was with him until the end, whatever that might be. He returned to Silver Hall a week later with a notebook full of notes, with a new understanding of the world, and with a new fear. Not for himself, for everyone. If someone is editing the code of reality, then the distortion could grow stronger. 1% could become 2, 5, 10. And then magic won't just start glitching. It will start to crumble. And with it, the world. The 8th month. Winter had loosened its grip. The snow was melting. Streams ran over the stones of the courtyard. But the cold did not go away. Not from the air, from the news. Messengers arrived from the southern borders. Crimson beasts had breached the outer perimeter. 3 villages destroyed in a week. The garrison of the southern fortress lost 40 men. Combat spells weren't working. Not all of them, but enough. A fireball passed through the beast's hide as if through water. An icy spear melted before it reached its target. The barrier cracked at the first strike. Standard magic failed. The council sent reinforcements, 2 archmages with a squad. They managed, by force, by brute power. They poured so much mana into their spells that any defense broke. The creatures were destroyed, but 2 from the squad died, and the archmages returned pale, silent, frightened. They didn't admit it, but Thorn told Ivory. Ivory wrote to Jisoo. The spells weren't failing by accident. The creatures somehow knew the structure of the attacking runes. Their hide reacted to specific signatures, like antivirus software reacts to known viruses. Jisoo read Ivory's letter. He read it again, then a third time. Then he took out a notebook and began to think. If the creature's skin recognizes spell signatures, that means it operates on a database. It has a list of known structures, every standard spell that the mages of Aetheria have been using for 1,000 years. Fireball, ice spear, lightning, barrier, all of them. The creatures knew them all. Where from? The answer was right there on the surface. The Great Formula. Someone with access to it leaked the spell structures. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe the creatures were part of the formula, its byproduct, its immune system gone out of control. Or the opposite, working as intended. The idea came at night. Jisoo hadn't slept. He lay in the dark and thought. If an antivirus recognizes known viruses, that means it doesn't recognize unknown ones. So we need a spell that doesn't look like itself. One that looks different every time. One that changes its signature with every cast. A polymorphic spell. In his past life, polymorphic code was a security team's nightmare. Viruses that rewrote themselves every time they ran, changed their structure, preserved their function. Antivirus programs couldn't catch them because every copy looked like a new program. Same principle, different environment. He worked for 2 weeks, every night, by candlelight. Leah helped with the theory. She had already mastered his decomposition method. She saw structures. She found patterns. They took a basic fireball, broke it down into elements. 4 active runes out of 9. Removed the clutter. And then Jisoo did something no one in this world had ever done. He added a randomizer, an element that changed the order of the active runes with every cast. Not the function, the order. The result was the same, fire, heat, a blast, but the spell's structure was different every time. Like a sentence where the words switch places, but the meaning remains the same. The first test failed. The spell fell apart on the third iteration. The randomizer broke the link between the second and third elements. Jisoo rewrote it. He added an integrity check. The second test passed. A small flame flared up, small, weak. But every time Jisoo activated it, the runic signature changed. He cast it 10 times, 10 different structures, 1 function. Leah watched with her mouth agape. Then she grabbed a pen and started scribbling in her notebook. She muttered something about polymorphism and how it changed everything they knew about rune construction. News of the breakthrough on the southern border reached the academy. The students were frightened. The teachers pretended everything was under control, but rumors were spreading. The crimson beasts were growing stronger, closer. The outer perimeter barrier of Silverhall was checked 3 times a week. The rector walked around looking gloomy. Reynold was training the upperclassmen with redoubled intensity. Hejin So, Jisoo, saw her every day. A senior, class president, the general's daughter. 14,000 mana, the gold standard. She led the drills, enforced discipline, resolved conflicts, worked from morning till night, flawlessly, perfectly, like a machine. Jisoo watched her and saw what others didn't. Emptiness. Hejin did everything right, but there was no life in her movements. There was no warmth in her voice. She functioned. She didn't live. The younger students flocked to Jisoo, to his circle. They laughed beside him, argued, asked questions. They felt alive. Hejin saw it, and something flashed across her flawless face. Not anger, not jealousy of him, jealousy of them. They could laugh. She couldn't. They could be themselves. She didn't know who she was. One night, she came to him. Jisoo was sitting in the library, alone. Leah had gone to bed an hour ago. The candle was burning down. He was finishing the 5th draft of the polymorphic spell. Hejin entered quietly. She stood by the door, a scroll in her hand. An official reprimand. Jisoo was in trouble for breaking curfew. The library closed at 10. It was 2 in the morning. She held out the reprimand. He took it. He looked at it. He looked at her. Hejin stood in the doorway and didn't leave. She was silent. She fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, not commanding, human. She asked what she had clearly wanted to ask for a long time. She asked if he could fix her, too. Jisoo looked at her straight back, at her perfect hairstyle, at her impeccable uniform without a single wrinkle, at her hands, which she didn't know what to do with when she wasn't giving orders. He said nothing was broken in her. He said it was just that no one had ever asked what she wanted. Hejin blinked. Once. Quickly. Then she turned and left. Quickly, almost running. Jisoo heard her footsteps in the empty corridor. Quick, uneven. Not the footsteps of a class representative. The footsteps of a person who, for the first time, had heard a question to which they didn't know the answer. He went back to work. The candle had almost burned out. He lit a new one. With his optimized spell. 5 elements, 20 mana. A bright, even light. And he continued writing. A week later, the creatures appeared closer. Much closer. A patrol spotted one in the forest 2 hours' ride from the academy. A large one. Twice a human's height. The bug its hide gleamed like wet stone. Eyes empty. White. No pupils. The patrol attacked. Standard spells, fireball, ice spear, barrier. Nothing worked. The hide absorbed everything, like the earth absorbs rain. 3 of the 5 patrolmen died. 2 returned. 1 was bleeding to death. The other couldn't speak. The rector declared a state of heightened alert. Students were forbidden to leave the grounds. The magisters reinforced the barriers, with standard spells, which didn't work against the creatures. Jisoo went to the rector with a notebook, with a polymorph spell. Explained the principle. The creature's skin acts like an antivirus. It recognizes known signatures. It blocks them. The polymorph spell changes the signature with every cast. The creature's skin can't recognize it. It can't block it. The rector listened. His face was gray, tired. He said he couldn't send a student into battle against the creature. Jisoo said he didn't need to go himself. He could teach. He could give a spell to those who went. The rector was silent. Then he said a demonstration was needed. The next creature appeared 3 days later, at night, by the south wall. The barrier trembled. The signal runes howled. The magisters ran out. The students woke up. Chaos. The creature was enormous, 3 meters tall. Its hide looked black in the torchlight. Red veins pulsed. It walked slowly, confidently, as if it knew nothing threatened it. Reynolds struck first. Aaron's spear, full power. The hide absorbed it. Wild struck second, a wave of fire. The hide absorbed it. The creature didn't even slow down. Jisoo stood 10 meters away, with a notebook, with a quill. Yuna beside him, katana drawn, hand on the hilt, calm, collected, waiting for his word. He looked at the creature, reading it, not the magic, the structure. The hide was covered in runes, tiny ones, almost invisible. Thousands, tens of thousands. Each rune contained the signature of a standard spell, a database, recorded on skin. He saw familiar patterns: fireball, ice spear, lightning, barrier, all the standard spells of Etheria. All of them. This creature knew every spell that in this world, and it knew how to defend against every one. But it didn't know his spell, because his spell didn't exist a minute ago. Jisoo leaned toward Yuna, quietly, quickly. He explained. A polymorphic fireball, standard activation. But before casting, you need to add an extra element, A randomizer. 4 strokes, he demonstrated. Yuna memorized it on the first try. She stood up, stepped forward. The magisters shouted for her to come back. She didn't hear them, or didn't listen. The creature turned around. Its white eyes stared at her. Yuna raised her katana. The rune on the blade flashed. The corrected rune. A pure stream, no loss. She cast it. Not a fireball, a flaming blade. Her own variation, with Jisu's randomizer. 4 strokes, a new signature. The blade ignited with a flame not found in the creature's database. Yuna struck. The hide didn't absorb it, didn't block it, didn't recognize it. The blade entered the crimson flesh like butter. The creature roared, the first sound it had ever made. Yuna struck again, and again, each strike a new signature. Each strike went through. The creature collapsed, heavily, dead. The ground shook under its weight. Silence. The magisters stood with outstretched arms, from which the mana of failed spells still oozed. The students at the windows froze. The rector stood by the door, his face pale. Yuna stood over the creature, the katana covered in blood. She breathed evenly, calm. She turned to Jisu, nodded, briefly, just like in training. Jisu jotted it down in his notebook. The Crimson Beast, antiviral type hide, polymorphic spell effective, confirmed by field test. The 10th month, spring. Almost a year had passed since the day Jisu opened his eyes in this body. The academy had changed. Not entirely, but the cracks were becoming visible. After the Crimson Beast's demise by the southern wall, people in Kale, people spoke differently. Not with mockery, not with pity, with fear, or with hope. It depended on who was speaking. Marcus Holden was silent. It was worse than if he had been screaming. He walked the corridors like a shadow. He stared at the floor. He didn't pick fights. He didn't insult anyone. Something inside him had broken after the second duel. Not his pride, his worldview. He couldn't put it back together. The rector allowed Jisu to hold one open lecture. One. As an experiment. Under the supervision of the masters. A safe topic. Optimization of basic spells. Nothing about the great formula. Nothing about distortion. Nothing about polymorphism. Just how to remove dead code from a light spell. Jisu agreed. Leah helped prepare the materials. Sonhi arranged the chairs. Ren stood by the door and counted the arrivals. Mira hauled benches from the neighboring hall because there weren't enough chairs. 300 people came. A hall with a capacity of 120. The rest stood in the aisles, sat on the floor, peered in through the windows. Jisu stood before them, a skinny boy in a gray robe with a lowest rank patch. 312 mana points, the weakest in the hall. And all 300 people were looking at him. He spoke for an hour, simply, without complicated terms. He showed a rune. He showed dead elements. He showed how to remove them. He showed the result. Less mana, same effect. He wasn't preaching. He wasn't calling for a revolution. He didn't blame the system. He just presented the facts. Here's the rune. Here are the excess elements. Here's the version without them. Check for yourselves. The hall was silent. Not out of boredom, out of shock. 300 people who had been casting spells their whole lives without a second thought were learning that 2/3 of their magic was junk. That they had been wasting mana. That their ancestors had been wasting mana. That their teachers had been wasting mana. That the entire system they had considered perfect and divinely ordained was rotten to the core. In the back rows sat 3 figures in hooded cloaks. Leah noticed. She whispered to Jisu. Archmages. He didn't know exactly who, but he knew it was important. They hadn't come to ban it. They had come to watch. After the lecture, they approached him, one by one, in pairs. Students with low reserves, commoners on scholarships, those whom the system had labeled weak. They asked if they could come again, if they could study, if they were allowed to. Their words sounded the same every time. Timidly, guilty, as if they were apologizing for wanting to know. Jisoo told them they could, to each one, to everyone. Sonhee stood nearby. She looked at him, at these people, at their faces. And on her face was a smile that Jisoo had seen only once before, when he showed her the corrected healing rune. Now that smile wasn't meant for him. It was for everyone. That evening, Haejin came again, not to scold him, to ask a question. She stood at the library door, hands behind her back straight, face composed. But her eyes were different. There was something in them that hadn't been there before. She said she had been at the lecture, standing in the doorway, listening. She said she hadn't understood everything, but she had understood the main point. That knowledge can belong to everyone, not just those with enough mana in their veins. Then she paused. Then she said that her whole life she had been the best reserve, the best grades, the best discipline, the best at everything. And that inside, it was empty. That she didn't know who she was if you took away all those bests. That she feared that question more than the crimson beasts. Jisoo listened. He was silent. When she finished, he didn't try to fix her, didn't break her down into parts, didn't look for dead code. He just asked what she wanted, not what was expected of her, not what she had to do. What she wanted. Haejin was silent for a long time. Then she said quietly that she wanted to sit next to someone and drink tea in silence. No reports, no obligations, no titles. Just to sit. Jisoo nodded. He pointed to the chair next to him. Sonhee, who was sitting in the corner silently checking the healing runes, poured a third cup. Haejin sat down. She took the cup. Her hands were shaking. She drank the tea, silently. 10 minutes. 20. No one asked her to do anything. No one expected perfection from her. No one looked up to her. She sat and drank tea. And in the 20th minute, Jisoo saw her shoulders drop. For the first time in all the time he had known her. Sagged. Relaxed. She exhaled and looked 10 years younger. That night, Haejin left after midnight. She turned around at the door, said she'd come back tomorrow, if she could. Jisoo said she could, always. A week later, Haejin was sitting in their circle, not as a leader, not as a supervisor, as a person. She taught them combat tactics and organization. They taught her how to ask questions, an equal exchange. Amber Kane showed up uninvited, just as a mercenary scout should. Redhead, sassy, a scar on her eyebrow, a leather jacket over a uniform she had no right to wear because she wasn't a student. She came at night, climbed over the wall, got past 3 patrols, found Jisoo in the library, sat down across from him, put her feet up on the table, said she had business with him. Jisoo looked at her, at the scar, at her red hair, at her right eye. Her right eye was different. Not alive, an artifact. A glass iris with a runic engraving inside. Beautiful work. Expensive. And deadly. Amber said her eye was an artifact, implanted 5 years ago to replace the one she'd lost. Works perfectly. It sees in the dark. It detects magical currents. It costs as much as a small estate, and it's slowly killing her. The artifact is draining her mana constantly, every minute, every second, like a parasite. She loses 3 or 4 units a day. Someday her reserve will drop to 0, and then the artifact will start devouring not mana, but life force. 5 mages looked into her eyes. They all said the same thing. The structure is too complex. It cannot be removed. It cannot be reconfigured. Live out what time you have left. Amber didn't cry. She didn't complain. She simply accepted it. She lived for 5 years with the clock ticking. She sold information. She saved money, not for herself, for her younger brother, whom she had left in an orphanage. Money for his education, for his future, for everything she would no longer have. Jisoo listened. Then he asked to see her eye. Amber removed the bandage she had been wearing when the artifact began to ache. He looked for a long time, squinting, reading the rune structure of the artifact. Tiny runes on the glass iris, the finest lines on the metal rim. Intricate work, military grade, perhaps even inquisitorial. He took out a notebook. He began to draw. He sketched the structure, element by element. Amber sat motionless. She watched him with her good eye. The artifact on the right glowed with a dim, reddish light. He worked until morning, then all day the next day, then another night. The structures was complex, the most complex he had ever seen, but the principle was the same. Input, body, output. The artifact absorbed the owner's mana, converted it into energy for runic vision, the result. The problem was in the converter. It operated with losses, huge ones. Out of every 10 units of mana, 9 vanished into the void. 1 went to vision. A leak. Colossal. Not a scribe's mistake, a design flaw. Whoever created the artifact knew what they were doing, but didn't know how to do it better. Or didn't want to. A day later, Jisoo looked up. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hands were covered in ink. He looked at Amber. She hadn't left. She was sitting in the same chair, waiting. He said he could reprogram the artifact. He could fix the leak. The artifact would stop killing her, but it would be a compromise. Her night vision would weaken by about 40%. Amber looked at him for a long time. Then her eyes glistened, wet. She blinked once, quickly, turned away. Her voice was hoarse when she spoke. She said, "Do it." The procedure took 3 hours. Delicate work, a pen on a glass iris, stroke by stroke, removing excess elements, rebuilding flow. Sony stood nearby in case something went wrong, a healing rune at the ready. Corrected, bug-free, Amber sat motionless, not breathing, not blinking. When Jisoo finished and stepped back, the artifact flickered. The red light in the pupil turned blue, steady, calm. The leak had stopped. Mana had stopped leaking. The countdown had stopped. Amber closed both eyes. She sat like that for a minute, 2, 3. Then she opened them. She looked at Jisoo. For the first time, with both eyes equally. Without pain in the right one. Without the aching emptiness. She stood up. She walked over to him. He thought she was going to hit him, or hug him, or say something defiant. She silently took his hand, held it for a second, let go, turned around, walked toward the door. Stopped at the threshold. Without turning around, she said that now she was his. And she left. Sony looked at Jisoo. He shrugged, said it seemed like they now had a scout. By the end of the 10th month, the circle had become a team. Sony, the healer, Leah, the theorist, Yuna, the fighter, Hyejin, the tactician, Ren, the shield-bearer, Mira, the artifactor, Amber, the scout, and Jisoo, the architect, the one who sees the whole system, the one who finds the loopholes, the one who writes the code that changes the rules. 7 people and 1 notebook against a world that didn't want to change. A year. Exactly a year since the day Jisoo opened his eyes in the body of Kyle Windmer. He stood by the window of his room and looked out at the courtyard. Morning, sun, students heading to class. An ordinary day for everyone except him. Over the past year, he had rewritten 32 spells, taught 7 people to see the structure of magic, killed 1 crimson beast with someone else's hands, survived 1 assassination attempt, stood before the Council of 7, found evidence that the distortion was man-made, and discovered that whoever from Earth had been in Etheria before him. Not a bad year for a dead man. Alice Windmer arrived without warning. The notification letter arrived a day after she did. She stood at the academy gates. Tall, slender, dark hair. Kyle's eyes. The same hazel. Warm, but watchful. She had worked as an archivist for the Council of 7. She'd seen the documents, heard the conversations, knew something unusual was happening around her younger brother. She'd come to check. Jisoo went down to the gate. Alice saw him, smiled, widely, joyfully, rushed to embrace him. He stood in her arms and felt Kyle's memory respond with pain. The boy loved this woman more than anything. And Jisoo stood in a stranger's body, accepting a stranger's embrace, and felt like a thief. She pulled away, looked at him, squinted. Something had changed in her face. It flashed and was gone. She said he had grown up. Said he looked different. Not physically. Different. His eyes were different. His posture was different. He had never looked straight ahead before. He always looked down. Now he didn't. Jisoo said a lot had changed over the past year. Alice nodded. But something remained in her eyes, a shadow, a question she didn't ask. They spent 3 days together. He showed her the academy, introduced her to the team. Sony liked Alice right away. They struck up a conversation in the kitchen. Both were caring. Both had a habit of feeding those they loved. Leah made an impression. Alice was a bookworm herself. She saw a kindred spirit. Yuna silently nodded to Alice. Alice silently nodded back. They understood each other without words. People who protect a single boy. Haejin was polite, formal. Alice saw behind it the same thing Jisoo had seen. Emptiness and fear, but she said nothing. Amber didn't show up. She didn't like meeting new people. She'd show up when she decided she was ready. Ren showed Alice his shield, proudly, like a child showing a drawing. Alice praised it, sincerely. Ren beamed. Mira shook his hand, firmly, like a blacksmith. Alice shook her palm and then laughed. 3 days, walks, conversations, meals in the dining hall, tea in the library. Alice talked about the capital, about work, about the rumors circulating in the council, about how the Grand Inquisitor Holdfast was gaining power, about how some in the council supported him, about how the word heretic was being heard more and more often. Jisoo listened. He took it all in. Every detail was important. Every rumor could be intelligence. On the second evening, Alice came into his room, late, after lights out. She sat on the bed. She was silent for a long time. Then she spoke, quietly. Her voice trembled. She said he had changed. Not just grown up. Changed. As if he'd become a different person. She said that before, Kyle was afraid of everything. Shadows, voices, mockery, his own reflection. But now he looks at archmages and doesn't flinch. Now he casts spells with his bare hands. Now he speaks words that exist in no language. She said she loved him, that he was her brother, that nothing would change that. but she wanted to know who he was. Jisoo sat in the chair across from her. He looked at her, at the tears she was holding back, at her hands clutching the edge of the blanket. She knew. Maybe not exactly, maybe not in detail, but she felt it. A woman's intuition. A sister's. The body remembers the one it loves. And this body wasn't quite the one she remembered. He could have lied. Could have said he'd just grown up, that the trauma had changed him, that he'd found himself. A beautiful lie. A convenient one. A safe one. But Alice deserved the truth. Not the whole truth, but the truth. He said Kyle wasn't dead, said he was here. His memory, his feelings, his love for her, all of it was here. But that something else had been added to it. Someone else. He said he couldn't explain it now, not completely, but that she was right. He was different. And that he would do everything so that the Kyle she remembered could be proud of her. Alice looked at him for a long time. Tears finally began to fall, quietly, down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Then she nodded. She stood up. She walked over to him. She put her hand on his head, just like she used to when Kyle was little. She said he was her brother, whoever he was. She left. The door closed quietly. Jisoo sat in the dark. He looked at the closed door, and for the first time in a year, he felt Kyle Windmer's eyes sting with moisture. Not from fatigue. Alice left in the morning. She hugged him at the gate, tightly, just like the last time. Not because she thought she wouldn't see him again, because now every hug was more precious. She knew she wasn't hugging her real brother, and she hugged him anyway. 2 days after she left, a letter arrived from Ivory. Short, encrypted. She and Thorn had developed a simple code. Ivory had found 2 more modifications in the Great Formula. Other fragments, other sections of code. The same habits, the same style, the same handwriting. Earthbound, programmer-like. One amendment was in the system for distributing mana across regions. It redirected part of the flow southward, to the southern border, to where the crimson beasts appeared, as if someone was feeding the rifts. The second edit was in the system of magical power inheritance. It introduced an additional multiplier for certain lineages, aristocratic ones. Those with already high reserves received even more. Those with low reserves received even less. The world's inequality was not natural. It was programmed. 30 years ago, someone had written into the code of reality a privilege for the strong and a punishment for the weak. Deliberately, calculatedly, precisely. Jisoo reread the letter. Then he burned it, as agreed. He sat and watched as the parchment turned to ash. He thought, who? Someone from Earth, someone who ended up here 30 years ago. Someone who gained access to the root level of the Great Formula. Someone who decided not to fix the system, but to rewrite it to suit themselves. To create the distortion. To exacerbate inequality. To feed the beasts. To tear the world apart piece by piece. Why? That question had kept him awake for 3 nights now. Why destroy the world you've ended up in? Why create chaos? Why kill people through others' hands? The answer could be simple. Power, control, greed, ordinary human motives. Or the answer could be more complex. Maybe this man, too, saw that the system was rotten. Maybe he decided that fixing it was useless, that it needed to be torn down completely and rebuilt, to tear the building down to its foundation. Maybe he considered himself a savior, a surgeon who cuts to heal. Jisoo knew people like that, in a past life. Hackers who believed that destruction was a form of creation, that chaos was renewal, that if you burn down a forest, a new one will grow, better, cleaner. They forgot that people lived in the forest. He opened the notebook, the one that had been lying in the hiding place under the jamon, the third one, the most important one. On the first page was a list, known modifications to the Great Formula. 3 items: distortion, mana redistribution, the inheritance multiplier. 3 modifications, 3 blows to the world. 30 years of work. And that was only what they had found. How much more? He closed the notebook, put it back, lay down, closed his eyes. Tomorrow marks the start of the 2nd year. The year in which he must find the one who is breaking the world, understand why, and decide what to do. Repair the old system, or write a new one, or find a third way that isn't visible yet. He fell asleep, and in his dream, for the first time, he saw something strange. A room, white, windowless, with a single table. A man at the table, with his back to him. Broad shoulders, dark hair. A screen in front of him. Not a magic screen, an electronic one. Lines of code on the screen. Earth code. The man turned around. His face was hidden, a shadow. But his voice was clear. He said one sentence. He said he was glad that Jisoo had finally made it. He said he had been waiting a long time. Jisoo woke up. Dawn, cold sweat. His heart was pounding. He sat up in bed. He breathed, slowly, deeply. A dream. Or not. In a world where magic is code, and code is reality, the line between sleep and a message is thinner than it seems. He stood up, washed his face, got dressed, went out into the hallway. Sonhee was already waiting with a cup of tea, just like every morning. She looked at his face, frowned, asked if he'd had slept. Jisoo took the tea, took a sip, hot, sweet, with herbs from Sonhee's village. Said he had slept fine. She didn't believe him, but she didn't press the issue. They went to breakfast. A normal day. The start of the 2nd year. The start of the hunt. Alice Windmer arrived at the academy and sensed that someone else was living inside her brother's body. Jisoo partially confessed to her, and Alice accepted him. Ivory found 2 more amendments to the Great Formula. One redirected mana to the rifts with the Crimson Beasts. The other amplified the magical disparity between aristocrats and commoners. That night, Jisoo had a dream in which a man from Earth said he had been waiting for him. The 2nd year began, and so did the hunt for the 2nd intruder. The 2nd year began with fire. Not magical fire, real. The village of Crosswood, a 2-day ride from Silverhall, burned for 3 nights. The Crimson Beasts came from the southern rift, 5 of them. The garrison couldn't handle them. Standard spells bounced off their hides like water off a stone. By the morning of the 4th day, all that remained of the village were embers and 112 bodies. The news reached the academy by noon. The dining hall fell silent. 300 students sat over their plates and did not eat. 112 people. Children. Old people, blacksmiths and bakers, people who didn't know how to cast and relied on those who did, and those who could cast poured garbage code into a hide that knew every line of it. Jisoo stood by the window and looked south. Somewhere out there, beyond the forests and hills, ruins were smoldering. Somewhere out there, the rifts were widening. Somewhere out there, the edits to the Great Formula were doing their work. feeding the beasts, weakening the defenses, destroying the world brick by brick. He gathered the team that evening, all 7 of them: Leah, Sonny, Yuna, Heijin, Ren, Mira, Amber. He told them everything, not just part of it. Everything. About the great formula, about the amendments, about the distortion, about the second intruder, about the dream. The silence lasted a long time. Leah spoke first. She asked why he hadn't told them sooner. Jisoo said he didn't want to put them in more danger than he already had. Knowledge of the amendments to the great formula isn't an academic matter. It's a state secret. Anyone who knows risks their head. Heijin said in a steady voice that they were already taking a risk. From the moment they sat down next to him, from the moment they started asking questions, there was no turning back. Sonny nodded. Yuna placed her hand on her katana. Ren straightened up. Mira crossed her arms over her chest. Amber smirked and said that things were finally getting interesting. Jisoo laid out 3 scrolls before them, 3 amendments. Distortion, mana redistribution, the inheritance multiplier. He explained each one, what it does, how it works, what the consequences are. Leah grabbed the parchment with the inheritance multiplier. She read it. She turned pale. Her hands were shaking. She raised her head. Her eyes burned behind her glasses. She said that if this was true, it meant all the inequality in this world was artificial. All the talk of pure blood and divine gifts was a lie, not a delusion. A lie, written into the code, by someone, intentionally. Jisoo nodded. He said it was true, and that they needed to find the one who did it. Amber raised her hand. She said that finding people was her job. She asked what they had. Jisoo said they had the code's style, habits, handwriting, and a dream in which a man said he was waiting for him. Amber snorted. She said she'd worked with less. She started with the archives, the ones Alice had access to. A week later, Alice sent the first batch of documents, records of strange events from 30 years ago. A man with no past who had appeared in the capital. No documents, no family history, no magical signature in the registry. He called himself Vaylin Craig. Age unknown. Origin unknown. Mana reserve at first measurement, 400 units. Low. Pitiable. But a year later, he was already working in the Council of Seven's archives. 3 years later, he became an Archmage's assistant. 5 years later, he gained access to the restricted library. 10 years later, he vanished. Without a trace. No records. No farewell. Vanished. As if he had never existed. But before his disappearance, he spent over 1,000 hours in the restricted library, in those very dungeons where Jisoo found a fragment of the great formula. Enough time to read the code, to understand it, and to transcribe it. Amber found something else, a portrait, an old, faded, a group portrait of the council staff from 25 years ago. In the back row, 3rd from the left, a man with dark hair and a calm face. Vaylin Craig. Jisoo looked at the portrait and didn't recognize the face, but he recognized the gaze. The gaze of a man who looks at the world and sees not people and trees, but code, structure, a system. The gaze that Jisoo saw every morning in the mirror. The underground network was growing, not according to Jisoo's plan, on its own. Students from his lecture returned to their academies, told their friends, showed them the recordings. Someone tried it. It worked. Told someone else. 3 months later, in 4 of Etheria's 7 academies, there were people who knew how to break runes down into their elements, who found dead code, who asked questions. They were called code readers, in whispers, in private. The Inquisition didn't yet know the scale of it, but they knew something was happening. Holdfast was receiving reports. He gathered evidence. he sharpened his sword. War was approaching, not against the creatures, between people. Between those who wanted to know and those who wanted no one to know. Thorn sent a note, a short one, 3 words. Get ready, they're coming. They arrived at dawn. Holdfast led 100 night mages, silver armor, white cloaks bearing the symbol of a flame, swords in their sheaths. Runes on their shoulder guards glowed red. Battle mode. They lined up in a straight line before the gates of Silverhall. 100 men, each with a reserve of no less than 5,000. 100,000 mana stood beneath the academy walls, awaiting orders. Sylvester Holdfast rode ahead on a black horse, tall, gray-haired, a face carved from stone. His eyes burned with the fire found only in those who are absolutely certain of their own righteousness. An amulet on his chest, 1,200 years old. A family heirloom. It had been passed down from inquisitor to inquisitor since the Order's founding. The rector stepped out onto the wall. Reynold stood beside him. The other magisters stood nearby. Holdfast raised his hand. He read the warrant. His voice echoed across the courtyard. Kyle Windmer, accused of heresy, of undermining the foundations of the magical order, of spreading forbidden knowledge, of insulting the great formula bestowed by the first mages for the good of all the peoples of Aetheria, to be immediately handed over for trial and penance. The rector replied that the academy does not hand over students without a decision from the Council of 7. Holdfast produced a scroll with 4 of the 7 seals, a majority. The council had voted. 4 in favor of extradition, 2 against. Thorn and 1 other. 1 abstained. The rector turned pale. 4 seals meant it was law. He could not refuse. But he stood there, unmoving. He didn't open the gates. He was silent. Inside the academy, Jisoo knew. Amber had brought the news an hour before dawn. She had intercepted the messenger with the order that very night. An hour. He had an hour. He used it. The team worked, each on their own task. Leah gathered all the notebooks, the real ones, with a complete analysis, with corrections to the great formula, with proof. 3 copies. 1 hidden in Mira's secret compartment, another sent with the pigeon ivory to the capital, the 3rd with Alice. If Jisoo was taken, the knowledge would remain. Sonhee prepared healing runes in case of battle, corrected, bug-free, a separate set for each team member. Yuna stood at the door to his room, katana drawn, face calm. She wasn't going to let anyone in. Heijin went to see the rector, spoke with him for half an hour. No one knew what she said, but when the rector stepped out onto the wall, his back was slightly straighter than usual. Ren stood in the hallway, his shield activated. His shield. Optimized. 30 mana. His hands didn't tremble. Mira was checking the academy's barriers, all the ones Jisoo had analyzed over the past year. She knew where the weak spots were. She knew how to reinforce them. Temporarily. For an hour. For 2. Long enough to buy some time. Amber had vanished, as she knew how, dissolved into the shadows. She had her own mission. Jisoo had given her a parchment, 1, with an address and a name, just in case things went wrong. Jisoo stood in his room, alone, looking in the mirror. Kyle Windmer's gaunt face, dark circles under his eyes, slender fingers. 312 units of mana, against 100,000 beyond the gates. He smiled. The same smile as on the first day. Not a joyful one, not a warm one. The smile of an engineer who had seen a problem. He went down to the courtyard. He walked past Yuna. She stepped after him. He shook his head, said he would go alone. Yuna gripped the hilt. Her jaw tensed, but she didn't go. He asked. For the first time, he asked instead of explaining the logic. She stayed. He stepped out into the academy's main courtyard, before a wall of armed mages. The gates were still closed. The rector stood above. Holdfast waited outside. Between them stood a 500-year-old stone wall. Runes on it glowed with a dim blue light. A barrier. Ancient. Powerful. But Jisoo knew it contained 312 dead elements. That it consumed 4 times more mana than necessary. That it could be breached if you knew where to strike. Holdfast knew this too, or maybe he didn't. But he had 100,000 mana that could break through anything, by brute force, as always. Jisoo approached the gate. He looked up at the rector. He told him to open it. The rector looked down. The old man's eyes were wet, but he nodded. The gates opened, slowly, heavily. The screech of metal. Jisoo stepped out, alone, unarmed, unarmored. A gray student's robe, a notebook tucked under his arm, a quill in his pocket. 100 mage knights stared at him. A boy, 15 years old, skinny, with dark circles under his eyes. Some smirked, some frowned. One lowered his eyes. Holdfast sat on his horse, looking down from above, his face impassive, his eyes burning. He said the boy was smarter than he'd expected, said that surrendering voluntarily would count in his favor at trial. Jisoo didn't move. He stood there. He looked at Holdfast, at his armor, at his sword, at the amulet on his chest. He'd been studying that amulet for 3 months. From records in the archives, from drawings in the restricted library, from descriptions Leah had found in forbidden books. 1,200 years, 40 generations of inquisitors. Each had worn it on their chest. Each had believed the amulet protected against evil, that it was a gift from the first mages, that it was a holy relic. Jisoo knew what was inside. 23 runic elements. Of those, 14 dead ones, and 1 mistake. 1. In the 3rd inner rune. A scribe's error, perhaps 600 years old, perhaps older. The rune that was supposed to read as protection from evil read as protection from the wearer. For 1,200 years, the amulet had not been protecting the Inquisitor. It had been protecting the world from the Inquisitor, limiting his power, holding him back. Every Grand Inquisitor in history had been weaker than he could have been, because his own amulet worked against him. No one knew. No one checked for 1,200 years. Jisoo took out a notebook. He opened it to the right page. He looked at Holdfast. He began to speak. His voice was steady, calm, like in a lecture. He said that the Inquisitor's amulet was 1,200 years old, a family heirloom. He said that there was a scribe's error in the 3rd inner rune. He said that the rune read not protection from evil, but protection from the wearer. Silence. Absolute silence. 100 knights froze. The horses stopped shifting their hooves. The wind died down. Jisoo continued. He said he could fix it, right now. 1 stroke, 2 seconds. Holdfast slowly raised his hand to his chest, to the amulet. His fingers in the gauntlet touched the metal. He looked at the boy, at the notebook, at the calm eyes that held no fear, not a drop. The boy with 300 mana stood before 100 knights and was not afraid, because his weapon was not strength, but truth. Holdfast was silent, for a long time. Then he spoke. His voice changed. It grew quieter, deeper. He asked how the boy knew the structure of the amulet that had not been removed from the Inquisitor's chest for 1,200 years. Jisoo said he knew because he had watched and he had seen. as anyone who can read runes, not just cast them, sees. Holdfast looked at him, at the academy behind him, at the windows where faces stood. Dozens of faces. Students, masters, people to whom this boy had given something they'd never had: the right to ask questions. He turned to his knights, then back to Jisoo. Then he raised his head to the sky, the gray winter sky above Silverhall. Then slowly, very slowly, he lowered his sword, sheathed it. The silence lasted another 5 heartbeats. Then Holdfast spoke a single word: retreat. 100 knights turned, silently, without question. Discipline. They marched away in formation. Silver armor glinted in the morning light. Holdfast rode last. He stopped at the bend, turned around, looked at Jisoo, said this wasn't the end. He said the world needed faith. He said the boy would kill faith. Jisoo replied. He said no. He said he would only kill those who profit from it. Holdfast looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. Once. Briefly. And rode away. Behind Jisoo, they all exhaled at the same time. Hejin, Yuna, Amber, who had materialized on the roof like a shadow. Sonhi was crying. Quietly. Happily. Leah was already scribbling in her notebook. Ren stood with his shield activated and didn't know how to turn it off. Mira sat against the wall and smiled silently. The rector stood on the wall. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks into his white beard. He didn't wipe them away. Jisoo looked at his hands. Kyle's slender fingers windmer. They didn't hold a sword. They didn't cast fireballs. They held a pen and a notebook. And that was enough. After the Inquisition's retreat, the world didn't become safer. It became more complicated. Holdfast was gone. But the Council's 4 seals hadn't gone anywhere. The warrant was in effect. Jisoo remained a heretic in the eyes of the law. They just hadn't taken him yet. Thorn had sent a long letter. The Council was divided. Drake was silent. Weiss openly demanded a retrial. 2 of the 4 who had signed the warrant were beginning to have doubts. Holdfast reported what had happened at the walls, about the amulet, about a mistake that was 1,200 years old. This blew the Council apart. If the Inquisitor's amulet contained an error, then any artifact could contain an error. Any spell, any rune. All magic was in question. 2 archmages demanded an inspection of their own ancestral artifacts. Weiss called it panic. Thorn called it the beginning. Jisoo wasted no time. He knew the window would close. Holdfast would return, with greater power, better prepared. Next time, talking wouldn't help. They had to act. Ivory sent new data. 4 more amendments to the Great Formula, each in a different region, each with the same handwriting. 7 in total. 7 amendments. 7 blows to the world. And they all led to one result: destabilization. Not chaotic, systematic. Someone was taking Etheria apart, like an engineer takes apart a mechanism, piece by piece, gear by gear, without breaking them, taking them apart, to reassemble them, in his own way. Amber found another trace of Valen Craig, an old debt contract in the Artifact Guild's archives. Craig had ordered materials, rare ones, expensive ones, rune crystals of the highest purity, mana conductors, stabilizers, components for working with the deepest layers of rune systems. He was preparing. 30 years ago, he was preparing for what he was doing now. The delivery address, an abandoned tower in the north of the continent, beyond the Empire's borders, in lands officially considered empty, uninhabited, dead since the War of the Seals 200 years ago. Jisoo looked at the map. A dot in the northwest. Far away. Dangerous. But it was the only lead. He assembled a team. He explained. We have to go. We have to find the tower. We have to find Craig, or what's left of him. Hae-jin said it was a trap. Obviously. Jisoo agreed. He said, yes, most likely. But a trap is also information. Whoever sets a trap shows that they know about you, what they fear, what they want. Yuna said she was going, no questions asked. Sonhee said she was going too. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from determination. Leah said someone had to stay. She said she would stay, with the notebooks, with the records, with the network of code readers. If Jisoo didn't return, the knowledge must not be lost. Jisoo looked at her. Leah stood with her back straight. Her glasses glistened. Her ink-stained fingers were clenched into fists. She didn't want to stay. Every cell in her body wanted to go. But she was smarter than her desires. Someone had to be the backup. She nodded to him. He nodded back, without words. Ren stayed with Leah. Mira, too. They would protect the records and continue the work at the academy. Amber went on a reconnaissance mission. Ahead, 2 days early. Hae-jin took command of the route. Ivory provided cover at the council. Officially, Jisoo was at the academy under supervision. Unofficially, he was traveling northwest with 4 companions to meet the man who had been breaking the world for 30 years. The journey took 12 days, through forests, through the Deadlands, through territories where magic malfunctioned more often than it worked. The distortion was stronger here, much stronger. Simple spells fell apart halfway through casting. Barriers flickered and faded. Even Jisoo's light spell was unstable. Proximity to the source. They were approaching something. Amber was waiting for them at the foot of the tower. Old, stone, 3 stories, no windows on the first 2, narrow loopholes on the third. Runes on the walls. But not ordinary ones, not academic, not military. Different. Pure. Without dead code, without superfluous elements. Like the runes of the first mages from the closed library. But new, fresh. Written by a hand that knew what it was doing. Amber said there was someone inside. One person, not hiding, not setting a trap, sitting and waiting. Jisoo looked at the tower, at the runes, at the door that stood ajar. An invitation. He said he would go alone. Yuna began to object. He raised his hand. Said that if it was Craig in there, he needed a conversation, not a fight. Yuna clenched her jaw. Hae-jin placed a hand on her shoulder. She said quietly that Jisoo was right. He went in. A staircase. Narrow. Spiral. The stone steps worn smooth by time. The runes on the walls glowed with a soft white light. Pure. Even. Without flickering. Optimized. Second floor. Empty. Only bookshelves. Thousands of them, from floor to ceiling. And notebooks. Stacks of notebooks. Dozens. Hundreds. He picked one up, opened it, and stopped. Notes. Rune analysis, decomposition of spells, searching for dead code. The same method, the same logic, the same principles, but deeper, more detailed. 30 years of work, 30 years of analysis, 30 years of solitude in a tower, alone with the code of the world. Third floor. A room, small, a table, a chair, a loophole window. A man sat at the table. A man. About 50 years old, he looked. But Jisoo knew that meant nothing. Dark hair streaked with gray, a calm face. Tired eyes. Very tired. A parchment lay on the table before him. Runes on the parchment. Complex. Profound. The root level of the great formula. The man raised his head, looked at Jisoo, and smiled. Tired, warm, like a man who had been waiting for a guest for a very long time. He said hello. He called him by name. Not Kyle. Jisoo. Han Jisoo. He said he had been waiting a long time. 30 years. He said he was glad the backup had worked. Waylan Craig. Real name, Park Dong-hyun. Software engineer. Born in 2041. Specialized in system architecture. Died in 2073 from a failed cardiac implant. Woke up in Etheria 30 years ago, in the body of a village boy with 400 mana points. He spoke calmly, without haste, like a man who had been rehearsing this conversation for 30 years. He sat at the table, his hands on the parchment, his voice steady, his eyes looking straight ahead. Jisoo stood by the wall. He listened. He didn't interrupt. Craig explained that he had understood the nature of magic after 2 years. The rune code, the structure, the great formula. Everything that Jisoo had grasped in a year. It took Craig longer. He didn't have 20 years of hacking experience. He was a systems architect. He built. He didn't break things. He gained access to the restricted library 5 years later. He read fragments of the great formula. He grasped the scale of the problem. The formula was rotting, not from age, from ignorance. Thousands of years of copying without understanding. Dead code, conflicts, leaks. The system was operating at 30% of its capacity. The rest was lost in the garbage. He decided to fix it. He gained access to the root level after 10 years of work, and then he saw the truth. The great formula wasn't written by the first mages. They found it. It was here before them, before humans, before Etheria as we know it today. It was the code of another civilization, or another world, written in a language that was eerily similar to the programming languages of Earth in the early 21st century. Comments in English, variables in the Latin alphabet, a structure like that of object-oriented languages. Someone before them, someone from Earth or a world similar to Earth, wrote this system, created Etheria, or found an empty world and launched magic in it like a program. Craig fell silent. He drank some water. His hands were trembling slightly. Then he continued. He said he tried to fix the formula, alone, without help, without tools, with 400 mana and the knowledge of a systems architect. He worked for 10 years and realized he couldn't do it. The formula was too big, too complex, too tangled by millennia of others' edits. One person couldn't read it in a single lifetime, couldn't understand it, couldn't fix it. He needed help. Help from someone who knew how to break things, not build them. Not an architect, but a hacker. Someone who saw vulnerabilities, who found loopholes. Someone who could dive into someone else's code and understand it in hours, not years. Then he began looking for a way to bring someone from Earth. He studied the mechanism of his own transfer. He found a module in the Great Formula responsible for transferring consciousness between worlds. A dormant module, inactive. Someone had used it to transfer him. Who? He didn't know. Maybe an automatic process, maybe a remnant of an ancient program. But the module worked, and it could be activated. Manually. He needed an anchor, a reference point in another world, a digital footprint. Data. Craig spent 10 years fine-tuning the module. 10 years searching for the right candidate. Not just anyone. Someone who could do what he couldn't. A hacker, a cracker, a pen tester. Someone who had spent 20 years breaking into other people's systems and saw code as a second language. He found Jisoo. found his digital backup, a cloud copy of his consciousness, that very one, the last thought before death. But I managed to make a backup. Craig didn't stage his death. He intercepted the consciousness the moment it was leaving the body, took a copy, transferred it, placed it into the body of Kyle Windmer, who was fading away from exhaustion and despair. 2 consciousnesses in one body, one departing, the other arriving. Jisoo listened. He was silent. Then he asked about the amendments, about the 7 amendments to the Great Formula, about the distortion, about the redistribution of mana, about the inheritance multiplier, about feeding the rifts, about everything that was killing the world drop by drop. Craig lowered his eyes, for the first time during the entire conversation. He was silent for a long time. Then he said it was him. All 7 amendments were his. Jisoo wasn't surprised. He knew. From the handwriting, from the style, from the habits in the code. He asked why. Craig looked up. He said the formula was beyond repair. Too complex, too tangled, too fragile. Every attempt to fix one error created 3 new ones. Like treating a patient whose every organ is affected by the disease. You can't remove the tumor without killing the patient. And so he decided otherwise. Not to fix it, to break it. In a controlled way, carefully, by design. To create a crisis that would force the world to change. Distortion. So that the magicians would finally ask why. The beasts. So that the old methods would stop working and people would start looking for new ones. Inequality. So that the system would become so unjust that it was impossible to tolerate. He broke the world so that the world would want to fix itself. He created pain so that movement would be born from pain. He burned so that something new might grow from the ashes. Jisoo looked at him, at his weary face, at the hands that had spent 30 years writing code that destroyed lives. 112 people in Crestwood. Patients killed by faulty healing devices. Villages burned by creatures. Children with low reserves whom the system crushed even harder because of his multiplier. Thousands of lives. Tens of thousands. Sony, who for 7 years considered herself a murderer. Because of a bug that had existed for 300 years. But which became fatal because of the distortion this man wrote. Jisoo said he understood the logic. He said he didn't accept it. Craig nodded. He said he knew. He said he'd hoped Jisoo would say exactly that. Because he didn't need an ally. He needed someone who would do things differently. Someone who would fix it, not break it. Someone who would find a third way. He stood up, stepped away from the table, pointed to the parchments. 30 years of records. A complete map of the Great Formula. Every module, every function, every connection. A lifetime's work. He said it was all for Jisoo. A map to a system that needs to be rewritten. Not broken, not patched. Rewritten. The return trip took 10 days. Jisoo carried 3 chests of Craig's notebooks with him. 30 years of work. The complete architecture of the Great Formula. A map that one man had drawn alone while the world burned at his own hands. Craig stayed in the tower, not because he didn't want to go, because he couldn't. 30 years of working with the root level of the formula had burned him out. His mana reserve had dropped to 0. His body was aging faster than it should. He looked 50. By Etheria standards, he was 45. But inside, he was an old man. Every edit to the Great Formula cost him a piece of his life. 7 edits, 7 pieces cut from himself. He said he might last a year, maybe less. He asked Jisoo not to waste time feeling sorry for him. Spend it on work. Jisoo didn't argue. Yuna was silent the whole way. Sonny, too. Hejin asked questions, practical ones, specific ones. How much time was needed? What resources? Who was needed? Amber rode ahead, reconnaissance, checking the path. The distortion in the northwest was strong. Spells malfunctioned, barriers flickered. Once, Sonny's healing rune failed. It simply went out in the middle of the cast. Sonny turned pale. Then she clenched her teeth. Recast it. The second attempt worked, but her hands trembled for another hour afterward. They returned to Silverhall at the beginning of summer. 1 year and 3 months had passed since Jisoo's awakening. The academy greeted them with silence. Something had changed. Leah was waiting at the gates. Her face was gray. Her eyes were red. She said that while they were away, the Council of 7 had made a decision. All 7 academies were to come under the direct control of the council. Autonomy was revoked. The rectors would report to appointed curators. Silverhall's curator? Archmage Selena Weiss. The very one who had turned pale when she saw the optimized spell of light. The one who understood what his method meant, and who decided that this could not be allowed. Rector Greyheart submitted his resignation. It was not accepted. He was removed. Formally for failing to maintain order, for harboring a heretic, for undermining the council's authority. The old man sat in his office at the top of the tower, alone, without power, without authority, without the cup he'd dropped on the first day because Weiss had taken the cup along with the office. Jisoo climbed up to him, 247 steps. Kyle's body conquered them without stopping. 1 year of training. 1 year of porridge and tea from Sonhee. 1 year of a life the boy hadn't lived before. The rector sat by the window, old, tired, but calm. He said he had no regrets, said that for the first time in 50 years, he felt he had done something right. Jisoo placed a notebook in front of him, one of Craig's notebooks, opened to the page with the architecture of the Great Formula. The rector looked at it for a long time. Then he said quietly that it was impossible, that one person couldn't have written it. Jisoo said that one person couldn't have done it. It took everyone. The next 3 months were the hardest. Weiss tightened the screws. She banned elective classes. She banned clubs. She banned gatherings of more than 3 people. She established surveillance, master curators in every hallway, tracking runes on the doors, monitoring of correspondence. The academy became a prison. The club went underground. They gathered at night, in the basement of the administrative archives that Harold had opened for them back in the first month. The old steward helped silently, but he served food. He watched the patrols. He warned them. He didn't understand their talk of runes and code, but he understood that these children were doing important. Because thanks to them, his lamps burned brighter. Because thanks to them, his budget finally balanced out. Because that was enough for him to choose a side. Jisoo worked, every night, with Craig's notebooks, with the help of Leah and Ivory, 3 minds on one task. He's a hacker, she's a theorist, Ivory is a systems engineer. The 3 of them did what Craig couldn't do alone. They read the Great Formula, layer by layer, module by module. They understood. Craig's map was detailed, but not complete. He worked alone. He missed connections. He didn't see the dependencies, the human factor. One eye sees less than 3. A month later, they found a solution. Not perfect, not final, but it worked. The Great Formula couldn't be fixed from the top. Too many layers, too many dependencies. Remove one element, and 100 related ones would collapse. It couldn't be broken, either. Craig tried. The result? 20 years of distortion, and thousands of deaths. But a third option was possible. Right over it, without replacing the old system, by supplementing it. A new layer that runs parallel to the old one. That takes on functions one by one, smoothly. No sudden shifts, no crises. The old formula continues to work. The new one grows alongside it. Over time, the old one becomes unnecessary. It dies out on its own. Like baby teeth. No need to pull them out. You need to grow new ones. Leah called it a soft migration. Ivory called it the only chance. Jisoo called it refactoring. To implement it, access to the root level of the great formula was needed. Full access, not through fragments from the library. Direct. The root level was located beneath the council tower, in the lowest dungeon, behind 7 seals, 7 keys, 1 from each archmage. Thorn gave his, voluntarily. Ivory stole the key from her former mentor, Archmage Drake. Drake found out. Silently. He didn't raise the alarm, he just didn't lock the door the next day. Maybe he understood. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he just decided to see what would happen. 5 keys remained. Heijin solved the problem. Not by force, not by trickery, by authority. She was the general's daughter. She knew how power worked. She went to the capital, met with the 3 archmages, one at a time, alone. She showed them the records. Not all of them, enough. Amendments to the great formula. Evidence, numbers, facts. 2 were frightened. 1 was angry. But all 3 gave her the keys. Because Heijin showed them what they feared to see. That the world is falling apart. That the distortion is growing stronger. That in 5 years, maybe 10, maybe 3, magic will start failing en masse. And then neither lineage, nor reserves, nor power will save them. 6 keys out of 7. The 7th was with Weiss. Weiss won't give it up. Never. Not for anything. She'd rather burn the world to the ground than admit she was wrong. Amber stole the key. Simple, clean, professional. Weiss discovered it was missing 12 hours later, but by that point, Jisoo was already standing in front of the root-level door. 7 keys, 7 locks. The door opened. Behind it was a room, not large, not small, round. Stone walls covered in runes, not thousands, millions. From floor to ceiling, every inch of stone was inscribed. The runes were glowing, all of them, different colors, blue, gold, green, red, white, alive, pulsing, working. This was Etheria's brain, the world's central processor, the place where code became reality. Jisoo entered, alone. The team was waiting upstairs, Yuna by the door, Sony with healing runes, Heijin in contact with Thor, Amber on the roof of the tower, Leah in Silverhall with the backups, Ren and Mira at their posts. Everyone in their place, just as he had taught them, just as they had taught each other. He sat down on the floor in the center of the room. He took out a notebook, a quill, an inkwell. He looked at the walls, at the millions of runes, at the code that ruled the world. 3,000 years. And for the first time in both his lives, he was not alone. The runes on the walls pulsed, a slow rhythm, like a heartbeat. Jisoo sat on the stone floor and listened. Not a sound, a flow. Mana flowed through the runes like blood through veins. Millions of lines of code worked simultaneously. Each controlled something. The weather in the western provinces, the density of mana in the Silver Sea, gravity on the eastern islands, the growth of grass in the Crosswood Valley, where the grass no longer grew because only ashes remained of the village. He opened the notebook. The first page, blank. He lifted the pen. His hand didn't tremble. Strange. He thought it would tremble, but no.
20 years of breaking other people's systems and a year of breaking other people's magic had brought him here. To this floor, to this pen, to this moment. He began to read, wall by wall, sector by sector. Craig's map lay nearby, a guide. Without it, he would have spent years. With it, hours. The first thing he did was find Craig's edits, all 7 of them, one after another. They glowed slightly differently, slightly brighter, slightly colder. Foreign code in the body of the old program, like splinters. He could remove them, right now. 7 strokes of the pen, 7 seconds. The distortion would stop. Mana redistribution would return to normal. The inheritance multiplier would vanish. The world would become what it was 30 years ago. But 30 years ago, the world was already rotting, just more slowly. Craig had accelerated the process. Removing his edits meant returning to slow decay. That's not a solution. It's a delay. He began to work, not to delete, not to patch, to rewrite. A new layer, on top of the old one. The first module, mana distribution. The old code distributed mana according to lineage. Purebloods got more, commoners got less. A system of privileges woven into the fabric of reality. Jisoo wrote a new module, even distribution. A baseline for every living creature, the same. No exceptions, no multipliers, no privileges. Everyone is born with equal access to mana. What you do with it is up to you, not your blood. The pen touched the stone. The runes fell into place. He didn't carve out the old module. He built a new one next to it, connected it. The old one kept working. The new one began, smoothly, slowly, like dawn. Not a flash, a gradual change. In a year, newborns' mana reserves will no longer depend on lineage. In 5 years, the difference will be smoothed out in the younger generation. In 20, the world will forget that blood once determined power. The second module, spell stability. He removed Craig's edit, which introduced random glitches. But he didn't just remove it. He replaced it. The new module added not a glitch, but a check. Every spell upon underwent automatic validation. If there were dead elements in its structure, the module highlighted them. It didn't break the spell, it showed the mage that the code was inefficient, like a compiler warning. A yellow icon, not an error. A recommendation. It works, but it could be better. Over time, mages will learn to see these hints. They'll learn to fix them. They'll learn to think. Not because Jisoo will force them to, because the system itself will show them the way. The third module, protection against creatures. It didn't close the rifts. They were part of the world, like volcanoes, like storms, natural processes. But he altered Craig's modification, which redirected mana to the rifts. Now it wasn't the rifts that received mana, but the barrier lines around them. Automatic, self-repairing, polymorphic. Each barrier changed its signature once an hour. The creatures wouldn't be able to adapt. They wouldn't be able to build a database. Fourth module, the most important one, open access to documentation. He incorporated a reference system into the Great Formula. Any mage casting any spell could request its structure, to see the elements, to see the connections, to see what works and what doesn't. A library of magic built into magic itself. Open, free, accessible to everyone. You don't have to be an aristocrat to read a book. You didn't have to be an archmage to ask a question. You just had to want to. He wrote for 6 hours, without a break. The quill flew across the stone. Runes fell into place one after another. A new layer grew. It filled up. It came to life. The old code didn't break. It didn't crack. It didn't fail. A new one simply appeared next to it, like a young tree next to an old one. The roots intertwined,
The branches reached for the light. When he finished writing the last element of the fourth module, the pen stopped. He sat on the floor. He looked at the walls. The old runes glowed next to the new ones. Different colors, different styles, different eras. 3,000 years of code, and his own. Fresh, clean. Written by a boy with 312 units of mana who, in a past life, hacked corporate networks, and in this one, rewrote the world. He reached for the last line. Activation. One word, one stroke, and the new layer would go live, parallel to the old one, quietly, imperceptibly. The world won't flinch. It won't explode. It won't turn upside down. Just tomorrow morning, somewhere in a village, a child will be born with a mana reserve independent of who his parents were. And in a week, some student at some academy will cast a fireball and see a quiet hint that 3 of the 9 elements are unnecessary. And he'll pause to think. For the first time in his life, he'll wonder not how to cast, but why the rune looks exactly like that. Small changes. Quiet, like drops, one by one. But drop by drop, the stone is worn away. He pressed, not with his hand, with mana, the last 12 units out of 312, all that remained after 6 hours of work. 12 units, the same amount he spent in the first duel to deflect Marcus's spear. The circle closed, the walls flared for a moment. All the runes at once, old and new, 3,000 years of code and 1 year of work. Golden light flooded the room, then faded. The runes returned to their usual glow, quiet, steady. But now, there were new colors in it, subtle, almost imperceptible. You had to know where to look. Jisoo knew. He lay down on the stone floor, cold, hard. The ceiling above him was covered with runes, like the sky with stars. He closed his eyes. Kyle Windmer's body was empty. Not a drop of mana, not a drop of strength. Everything had been given away. The door opened. Footsteps, quick, light. Sonhee fell to her knees beside him, her hands on his face, warm, as always. A healing rune flared, corrected, bug-free. Mana flowed into him, gently, like warm water. He opened his eyes. Sonhee was looking at him, her eyes wet, her lips trembling. She said he hadn't eaten again. He laughed, quietly, hoarsely, with Kyle Windmer's laugh. Yuna followed Sonhee in. She looked at him, at the walls, at the new runes. She nodded, briefly, like in training. Behind Yuna came Heijin. She surveyed the room with a tactician's gaze, assessed, accepted. Behind Heijin came Leah. She didn't look at the walls. She looked at the floor, at the notebook, at the notes. Her eyes behind her glasses burned. She was already reading, already understanding, already seeing what he had done. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. She said one word, beautifully. After Leah came Amber. She stood by the door, leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, smirked, both eyes, alive and artifact-like. They looked the same, no pain, no gnawing emptiness. She said everything was clear outside. Weiss was furious, but Thorn and Drake were blocking her. The council was paralyzed. They had time. Ren had sent a pigeon. A short message. The academy stands. The network is up. Code readers are in position. Mira wrote in the margins that the south wing has finally been repaired. The roof isn't leaking. For the first time in 10 years. Ivory sent a note. 4 words. 20 years weren't in vain. Alice sent the letter, a long one, a warm one. She wrote that she was proud of her brother, whoever he might be, that she loved him, whoever he might be, that she was waiting for him to come home whenever he returned. Jisoo lay on the floor of the Great Formula's root room and read his sister's letter. Sonhee sat nearby. Yuna stood by the door. Hejin spoke with Torn through a communication artifact. Leah was scribbling in a notebook. Amber was watching the perimeter. The team. His team. 7 people he had found one by one, to each of whom he had given something. Sonhee, freedom from guilt. Leah, the right to think. Yuna, the honor of her ancestors. Hejin, the right to be human. Amber, the right to live. Renu, the right to try. Meyer, a place where her hands are needed. And each of them gave him something in return. Sonhee, care. Leah, an equal mind. Yoon, loyalty. Hejin, order. Amber, eyes in the dark. Rena, stubbornness. Meyer, strong hands. He stood up, slowly. Sonhee helped. He got to his feet. He staggered, but he stood. He looked at the walls, at the new runes burning alongside the old ones. A code that would change the world, quietly, drop by drop, person by person. One child born with an equal chance. One mage who asked a question. One rune corrected not because it was ordered, but because they understood. He took out a notebook, opened it to a blank page, wrote a single line. First commit accepted. Migration initiated. Version 2.0. He closed the notebook, put it in his pocket. He turned toward the door. Sonhee was walking beside him. Yuna behind him. Hejin ahead. Leah slightly behind, nose in her notebook. Amber had already vanished, somewhere on the roof, in the shadows, in her place. They climbed the stairs, upward, toward the light, toward the morning, toward a world that had already begun to change, quietly, unnoticed, like dawn. Jisoo walked and thought, not about the great formula, not about Craig, not about the council, not about the creatures and the rifts. He thought about how, in his past life, he had died alone, in a corporate apartment. Red error code, darkness. No one noticed. But in this life, in this body, in this world. Walking beside him were the people who had come for him in the dungeon, who had waited at the door, who had brought tea and healing runes and a letter from his sister, who hadn't left. Not once. He emerged onto the surface. Morning, sun, a warm breeze. Birds flew over the capital. Somewhere at the academy, Ren was showing the underclassmen how an optimized shield worked. Somewhere in the forge, Mira was forging a new artifact based on his blueprints. Somewhere in the council library, Ivory was opening the first volume of the Structural Magic Handbook. Somewhere in the village, a mother held a newborn in her arms. The child was breathing. Mana flowed, steadily, purely, without multipliers, without privileges, just life. Jisoo stood on the steps of the council tower. He looked at the city, at the people, at the morning, at a world that did not yet know it had changed. It will find out. Not today, not tomorrow, but it will find out. And then it will decide, each for themselves, what to do with an equal chance. How to live in a world where blood doesn't decide. Where knowledge is accessible, where questions aren't heresy. He smiled, not like on the first day, not an engineer's smirk, a warm, genuine, weary, the smile of a man who was born twice and had finally found what was worth it. Sonhee tugged at his sleeve. She said there was a cafe downstairs. She said he hadn't eaten again. Jisoo nodded. He went downstairs, down the steps, toward people, toward tea, toward the life he had chosen for himself.